all the National Guard members that were assigned to the DC National Guard. At 3:04, that decision was made. Between that period of time, between 3:04 and 4:10, basically, Secretary McCarthy had asked for, he wanted to understand, because of the dynamics on the Capitol lawn, with the explosives that obviously shots had been fired, he wanted to understand the employment of how the National Guard was going to be sent to the Capitol, what their missions were going to be. Were they going to be clearing buildings? Would they be doing perimeter security? How would they be equipped? He wanted to understand how they were going to be armed, because obviously shots had been fired. He was asking a lot of questions to understand exactly how they were going to be employed here at the Capitol, and how many National Guard members needed to be employed on the Capitol.
Let me just say, with all due respect, and my time is coming to an end, 3 hours and 19 minutes. 3 hours and 19 minutes from the first call, plea, really, with his voice cracking with emotion, as the Major General said. You have Chief of Police, son, saying, help, we need help, now. 3 hours and 19 minutes. And that can't happen again. Do you agree with that?
Senator, I do.
Thank you.
Very good. Ranking Member Blunt.
Thank you, Chairwoman. General Walker, if the restrictions on your authorities hadn't been put in place by DOD, what would you have done when Chief Sund called you at 1:49 on January 6th with an urgent request for National Guard assistance?
I would have immediately pulled all the guardsmen that were supporting the Metropolitan Police Department. They had the gear in the vehicles. I would have had them assemble in the armory and then get on buses and go straight to the armory and report to the most ranking Capitol Police officer they saw and take direction. And further, just let me add this. So one of my lieutenant colonels on his own initiative went to the Capitol anticipating that we were going to be called. So he would have been there, and he met with Deputy Chief Carroll of the Metropolitan Police Department, who asked him, where is the National Guard? How come they're not here? And this colonel said, well, I'm sure they're coming, and I'm here to scout out where they're going to be when they get here. So that was the plan. I would have sent them there immediately. As soon as I hung up, my next call would have been to my subordinate commanders, get every single guardsman in this building and everybody that's helping the Metropolitan Police, remission them to the Capitol without delay.
And how quickly do you think you could have had people here? I think you said a minute ago that the Guard had moved from Andrews to the Armory here by 3:30, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And how quickly was the colonel here that was...
He came with the police, so
he was here immediately?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He was here immediately. When the Metropolitan Police left some of the traffic control points, my colonel left with them and came straight to the Capitol, anticipating that that's where the fire was and that fire needed to be put out.
Well, there certainly was concern here immediately. In fact, yesterday I saw a message that I sent Mr. Elder, who was the director of the Rules Committee for me when I was chairman at the time, and the quote on that message, that text message, was, could this information about the Defense Department and the National Guard possibly be true? That's 3:09, already wondering where Senator Klobuchar and I and other senators were. Could it possibly be true that the Defense Department was not sending the Guard immediately? Mr. Salasys, on the January 5th letter, that's described as Secretary McCarthy relaying new restrictions from the acting Secretary of the Defense, Christopher Miller. Would that be accurate? Would those be new instructions? And do you agree that General Walker had more flexibility before those instructions than he did after? I think that's a yes or no. Do you agree he had more flexibility before those instructions than he did after? That would be one question. And two, would it be fair to say those were new instructions or not?
Sir, Senator, General Walker, in fairness to him, can't respond to a civil disturbance operation without the authority of the Secretary of Defense. So, absent these memos, General Walker would have had to get approval to respond to the Capitol through the Secretary of Defense.
Well, let's talk about that approval process. I think you said it a minute ago to Senator Portman, if you'd like to go through the timeline. I assume you're talking about the Department of Defense timeline that I have in front of me. You mentioned 1504 as one of your reference points. At 1519 or 319, that timeline says the Secretary of the Army phone call with Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi about the nature of Mayor Bowser's request. Secretary of the Army explains Acting Secretary of Defense already approved full DC NG, full DC National Guard mobilization. Would that be right as of 319?
That would be accurate, but if I could clarify what mobilization is.
Well, let me go one step further, and I'll let you do that. At 1526, 326, Secretary of the Army phone call with Mayor Bowser and Metropolitan Police Chief relays that there is no denial of their request and conveys Assistant Secretary or Acting Secretary of Defense approval of the activation of full National Guard. So on your timeline, within 7 minutes, one is mobilization, the other is activation. Go ahead and explain what those two things mean.
So, Senator, those words are being used interchangeably. What Secretary Miller did at 1504 on 6 January was authorize the mobilization or activation of the National Guard, the DC National Guard. All that does, sir, is provide for the National Guard to be called in from wherever their homes are to come to the Armory. That's what the mobilization activation order was.
I wonder if that's what I wonder if that's what Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi thought it meant. Now, you can't answer that, only they could. And I also wonder if that's what Mayor Bowser thought it meant when they were told at 319 and 326 that the Guard has been mobilized and the Guard was being activated. I don't expect you to be able to answer what they thought. I know I would have assumed that meant the Guard was on the way unless I was specifically told, well, they're mobilized, but they really won't be there until we make a decision hours later. At 4:32, the Acting Secretary of Defense provides verbal authorization to remission DC National Guard to conduct perimeter and clearance operations. So that's 4:32. That's an hour and 10 or so minutes later. Is that the moment when the Guard was told they could move forward?
Yes, Senator, it is.
Do you agree with that, General Walker?
5, and I got that from the Secretary of the Army. It was relayed to me. I never talked to Secretary of Defense Miller, and I didn't talk to the Secretary of the Army. Army senior leaders told me at about 1708, 508, that the Secretary of Defense has authorized our to support the Capitol.
So, Senator, if I could, in fairness to General Walker, too, that's when the Secretary of Defense made the decision at 4:32. As Walker has pointed out, because I've seen all the timelines, he was not told that till 5. That's what.
How is that possible, Mr. Salazar? Do you think that the decision, the moment we were in, was made at 4:32, and the person that had to be told wasn't told for more than half an hour after the decision?
security events, and these designated events receive expanded federal support for event security. Factors used to determine national special security event designations include the attendance of U.S. officials, as well as the size and significance of the event. In our hearing last week, the former officials in charge of security here at the Capitol testified that DHS did not reach out to U.S. Capitol officials about designating January 6th joint session of Congress as a national special security event. So, Ms. Myslova, to your knowledge, did any Department of Homeland Security officials ever consider or recommend designating the January 6th joint session of Congress as a national special security event?
And appreciate all of the questions.
Sorry. Thank you, Senator. No, to my knowledge, no one at the Department of Homeland Security did consider designating January 6th as an NSSC. Also, to my knowledge, no one responsible for protecting the Capitol asked for such a designation.
Right, but when we're talking about an NSSE, you don't need a request from the Capitol, correct?
That is correct,
You could have DHS could have initiated it. So what is the department's current policy and process for designating national special security events? And were there any procedural issues blocking such a designation in spite of the growing evidence of intelligence available to federal security officials prior to the event?
I'm sorry, Senator. I am running currently the Office of Intelligence and Analysis for DHS. We have a small role in the NSSC process, but I am not qualified to speak about the whole process. It's fairly complicated. I'm happy to have Secret Service reach out to you, ma'am, if you'd like me to follow up with that.
Well, I think it's really important for us to understand what the processes are. We had, as has been pointed out, the vice president-elect, all members of Congress in one location at an event where there was clear intelligence that might turn violent, and there appears to have been no communication or effort by DHS to designate this in a way that would have had this security that we're now standing about stood up ahead of time in an effective way. So I look forward to following up with you on that. I want to turn to Ms. Sanborn now. According to a recent report, the FBI has currently charged 257 people associated with the events on January 6th. Of the individuals charged to date in relation to the attacks of January 6th, how many were already under investigation by the Bureau?
Ma'am, I'd have to get you the specific number, but I can only recall from my memory one of the individuals that was under investigation prior.
And was that because the FBI is limited in its tools or capacity to monitor, charge, or arrest these individuals prior to January 6th? Was this a manpower issue? I'm just trying to understanding, looking back now, what might have made a difference in charging, in being able to move against some of those individuals sooner?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's twofold. So it's the complexity of trying to gather the right intelligence that helps us predict indicators and warnings. And I spoke earlier about, while there's a volume out there of rhetoric, trying to figure out that intent is very challenging for us in the intel community because it happens on private comms and encryption. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, of the people that we were investigating, so predicated investigations, we don't necessarily have the ability to mitigate the threat they might pose by travel if we don't have a charge. And so I think you're tracking that we were aware of some of our subjects that intended to come here. We took overt action by going and talking them and trying to get them to not come, and that worked in the majority of our already predicated cases.
Okay, thank you. I'd look forward to following up with the FBI more about that. I also have another question for you about the FBI's information sharing practices. On January 5th, the FBI Norfolk Field Office issued a report that some extremists were preparing to travel to Washington and commit acts of violence. That report eventually made it to a U.S. Capitol Police analyst, but it didn't make it to the former Capitol Police Chief, Mr. Sund. So I think it's important for us to understand whether this was a failure in information sharing policy or practice. What's the standard policy for disseminating reports like that?
Yes, ma'am, that's a great question. I'd just like to segue into that part of the reason we were able to get that intelligence report from the Norfolk office is because we made it a national collection priority for all 56 field offices to collect whatever they could on the joint session as well as inauguration. And so when they collected that information, they did follow our normal process, and I think we heard yesterday from the director, and went above and beyond that process. So they documented it quickly
Yep.
within the situational information report, and they disseminated it 3 different ways: in writing, via email, verbally, and then also put it in what we call the LEAP portal, which is available to all state and local partners across the United States.
So I'm trying to understand, though, how it didn't get elevated or communicated to the highest level. Who was the highest official in the FBI to be informed of the intelligence?
So I, similar to Director Ray, found out about it days after. And so I think it's very important to also caveat what that was. It was raw, unvetted information, and only because of the collection message did it get as quickly elevated to the Washington field office and disseminated to the task force officers. So thousands and thousands of tips come in just like this on every day, and not all of those get elevated to senior leadership.
Except that this was tips about violence at the United States Capitol, where we were going to have all members of Congress, the current vice president, the vice president-elect. And so, given the gravity of the threat, it is very hard for me to understand why somebody didn't pick up the phone. And I'd like to understand, too, whether any of the following were informed of the intelligence: the president, the White House chief of staff, the attorney general of the United States, the speaker of the House, or the Senate majority leader.
Not to my knowledge, ma'am, and I think you heard the director say this yesterday, and I echo it 100%. Anytime an attack happens, we're going back, and we're going to figure out what we could have done better and differently. So I echo there's always processes that could be improved.
Look, I will just say this, that one of the things before a major event that one should always do is figure out who the leadership is, and they should be talking twice a day on the phone for the week leading up at least. That's kind of standard practice, at least in the states that I'm familiar with. It's certainly standard practice for governors. And it is astounding to me that even if it's raw intelligence, given what the stakes were on January 6th, that kind of sharing wasn't routine and that it didn't happen. So I hope very much that we will look back at this and develop kind of standard operating procedures so that the leadership of security at the Capitol, the leadership of security in all the various agencies are sharing this kind of information person to person rather than relying on standard emails and the like. Thank you very much.
I will say that's the purpose of the command post, but 100% echo your point, which is let's go back and figure out what we could do differently.
Okay. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you, Senator Hassan. And for members of the Rules Committee, we're following the order set forth by the Homeland Security Committee, how they do their order. So if there's questions about that, that's how we're doing it today. And next is Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to ask this question. In August of 2017, DHS, Office of Intel and Analysis, and the Virginia Fusion Center issued a report days before the violent protests in Charlottesville, Virginia. The report warned that the protests could be among the most violent to date. It warned that anarchist extremists and white supremacist extremists are calling on supporters to be prepared for and to instigate violence at the 12 August rally. Now, this was very similar to what we saw in the lead-up to the January 6th insurrection, when groups were actively planning to come to Washington and commit violence. Yet, there was no similar intelligence report by the Department of Homeland Security for this occasion. My question is why and what happened to change this procedure?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. Before the election and then into the inauguration, INA did publish 15 separate unclassified reports that did discuss specifically that there was a heightened threat environment, that the threat could come from lone actors or small cells. We assessed that those that were motivated by concerns about the election and grievances associated largely with COVID-19 restrictions would also appear to be armed. And we also warned that they could transition quickly from a peacetime situation into a violent situation. I actually, in preparation for this hearing, did review all of those reports and was impressed with how well the team did. They were very well written and very specific. The point, Senator, is that we thought we had provided that warning. We did not have anything specific about an attack on the Capitol to occur on January 6th. So we did not issue a separate report. In hindsight, we probably should have, but we had just issued a report on December 30th with our colleagues at FBI and the National Counterterrorism.
Jesus. I'm gonna finish watching this trans athlete thing. It's very interesting.
Lawyers who both have a what we mean is that every competitor should have an equal chance of winning. That's what I mean by fairness. Okay, well, as a philosopher, that cannot possibly be right. If that's what you mean by actual equal chance, then any one-on-one competition will turn into a coin flip, where the outcome of the event is a game of chance, not skill. Any six-way race, which is the Kieran in my event, I showed you that picture, then it would be the roll of a die. And we really don't think that sport should be that sort of chance. Moreover, the whole purpose of training is to literally unlevel the playing field. I have a nutritionist and 2 coaches, 2 full-time coaches and nutritionists. I have the best equipment sponsors, right? I work on rest and travel and train my ass off. That snowstorm is really pissing me off. To get better than other people, to have a competitive advantage over other people. So fairness cannot be not having a competitive advantage over other people. The whole purpose of training and having better equipment is to be better than other people, to have a competitive advantage. So fairness cannot mean having no competitive advantage over other people. It cannot mean having an equal chance of winning. So what could it mean? What are some better options? So I'm going to point to 2 philosophers and a group of lawyers who both have a shared way of thinking about sport. They treat sport as a cooperative social venture or a social union. So this is like social contract theory sort of stuff. Okay, so this comes from Coggin et al., the first paper. They say an athlete may benefit from being allowed to participate and in exchange surrenders liberty to the extent that his or her fellow athletes agree. And then they continue, we may therefore conceive of taking part in sport as the consensual participation in a game with agreed binding rules that are known from the beginning. This means that it can be fair to treat participants differently so long as it has been agreed to by all the players. So that agreement by all the players is what matters here. And then a person that they're actually drawing on is Sigmund Lowland. He says that we should choose norms or guiding principles or rules that no one can reasonably reject as a basis for unforced informed general agreement. So one thing many people think about how to think about trans athletes in sports is like, well, let's ask the other athletes. And we should only adopt policies that every athlete can agree to. Well, I'm going to show you that no. The philosopher and the theory of justice that they're drawing on here, they are screwing it up in a way that is shocking to other philosophers that they would screw it up this much. So I want to pick on, they're using these phrases of so long as it has been agreed to by the players and no one can reasonably reject. What matters here is who's the we. So when we're talking about no one can reasonably reject, are we including trans and intersex people when we're talking about policies that exclude trans and intersex people? Usually the answer is no. When we say we need policies that everyone agrees to, they only think about cis people. Everyone only ever thinks about cis people. But they're drawing on the philosophy of John Rawls here. So Rawlsian theory of justice. His big issue was the problem of the tyranny of the majority. The problem that a majority of people can agree to a discriminatory policy if it discriminates against a weaker minority. You know, world history doesn't show us that ever happening. He wanted to think about justice in a way that could remove personal biases and in a sense, self-interest. But in another sense, he thinks we should all think as rational, self-interested people, but under certain conditions. So he proposes this thought experiment that he calls the original position. So he says, what policies would people agree to as self-interested rational agents if you didn't know who you were? So we're all in a room, we're going to sit around tables, and like Men in Black, I'm going to use the neuralizer, and you're not going to know your gender, your sex, your race, your sexual orientation, your age, your citizenship, geographic location, education, socioeconomic status. You know nothing about you. You don't know whether you're able, disabled, nothing. And then I'm going to ask you, what policies should we agree to as principles of justice and fairness under those conditions of not knowing who you are? And the issue here is we won't adopt policies that violate basic human rights from behind this veil of ignorance in the original position. However, a person may agree to trans-exclusionary policies if they know they're cisgender. And in fact, we already know that many cisgender people are perfectly happy with trans-exclusionary policies. But under this Rawlsian framework, that same person will not risk their basic human rights behind the veil of ignorance. So, the key for Rawls is the veil of ignorance. However, the two groups of people that I mentioned before, they were thinking about fairness in sport as rules that everyone could agree to or that no one could reasonably object to. They both take Rawlsian justice except the veil of ignorance. And if you know anything about Rawlsian theory, that is literally fucking it up as much as possible. You could not have screwed it up more, because for Rawls, the veil of ignorance is literally everything. It is the machinery of his view. So these two groups are thinking about fairness in sport without the completely necessary part of the theory. So what I'm going to say is, well, let's use the necessary part of the theory, and rational, self-interested people will never gamble with their basic human rights, like participation in sport. Sport's a human right. You wouldn't risk it trying to agree on policies in sport if you don't know whether you're cis or trans or intersex. You would choose maximally inclusive policies because you're worried most that you don't want to screw yourself. If you turn out to be the most marginalized person in society, you're trying to make their life as best as possible. So you're trying to play it as safe as possible. So if you use Rawls properly, you get the answer of trans inclusion in sport is fairness. So fairness in sport is the policies we would choose from behind the veil of ignorance, not knowing who we are. It is not the policies we would agree to, knowing who we actually are, because we're biased people. Okay, so that was the philosophical detour. Now it's science time. This is my favorite part. So the rational basis behind the hyperandrogenism policy is the claim that men's performance, on average, at the elite level, is 10 to 12% better than women. And, we could look at a graph at the world record times or the world record lifts in every sport, and it's about 10%, give or take, depending on the event. The longer the event, the marathon and into all.
Just show respect, please. Just I don't understand why you had to come in here and be a dipshit. I'm going to have to time you out for, because I just can't deal with that.
Marathons, the gap closes, and then women start winning in really long endurance events. There's an unsupported cross-US bike race, and a woman just times or the world record lifts in every sport, and it's about 10%, give or take, depending on the event. The longer the event, the marathon and into ultra marathons, the gap closes, and then women start winning in really long endurance events. There's an unsupported cross-US bike race, and a woman just won it last year, which is badass. So really, really long events, that performance gap keeps closing. Okay, but the implication behind this observation is that, well, men have more testosterone, right? The way we talk about testosterone is that it's the male hormone. Well, this performance advantage must be because of the testosterone. And then the implication is that any performance advantage of 10 to 12% is unfair, right? That's the claim. That's what everyone just thinks is obvious. The Fox guy I was talking to, doing a TV interview, which would be airing now, just like couldn't wrap his head around that being false. So I'm going to show you why it is not due to testosterone. The performance differences cannot be due to testosterone. There is no relationship between endogenous testosterone and performance. Okay, so first, I want you to think about the range of different types of bodies that we find in sport. These are all the most elite of elite athletes. We have bike racers, we have triple jumpers, we have a hammer thrower, we have a bodybuilder, we have Tara Lipinski, who was a figure skater, we have Sarah Robles, who's a weightlifter. I want to talk about these two right here. What sport do you think she does? Basketball. She's way too skinny for basketball. She's a high jumper. Right there, maximally skinny, maximally tall people. The average woman high jumper is like over 6'2", okay? What sport do you think this is? Yeah, it's gymnastics, right? She's wearing the parallel bars equipment. So I want you to think about gymnastics and high jump. And I want you to think about how much height differences contribute to performance advantages for sports that select for height. So if we were to have these two women compete with each other in high jump, how much of a competitive advantage do you think this woman has? Is it more than 10 to 12%? In fact, it's probably like infinite, right? Because this person will be so uncompetitive that she shouldn't even bother showing up, right?
This is the argument that Mixed Vivian Wolf was saying. People are hyper obsessed about. I mean, I don't know where she's going, but let me just continue to watch. But you see where she's going.
So height for sports that select for height, and high jump massively selects for height because the whole point is getting your center of gravity past this bar. By the way, the physics of doing the Fosberg flop, their center of gravity passes below the bar the whole time. Crazy. Physics is crazy. Okay? But conversely, in gymnastics, the tall woman is not even remotely competitive because the physics of tumbling and spinning is that you want to be small and compact. There's a reason that gymnastics has a minimum age because the sport so heavily selects for small bodies that international federations were getting like 11 and 12-year-old girls at the world championship level, and the forces on the body on growing bones and joints like screws you up for life. So they said we have a minimum age of 14 at the competitive level in the world, right? Because it so heavily selects for smallness. So that in a sport that selects for smallness, this woman has a massive competitive advantage, a hell of a lot more than 10 to 12%. So we're permitting performance advantages much larger than we are attributing to testosterone, and we think it's fair. So why are we singling out testosterone? Height often provides way more than a 10% competitive advantage. We're in Victoria, which is the home of the national rowing team. A friend of mine is a philosopher. She's a Canadian who has a gold medal in rowing from the Barcelona Olympics. She's 6'4" and wears 3-inch heels. I like taking pictures next to her. Over time, we can track the average height of Olympic medalist rowers. And you can see a very clear trend line up. And that's because we're getting better and better at picking what types of bodies are better at what types of sport. It's not that the average height of people has increased that much. It hasn't. It's barely changed in 100 years. But we're better at selecting tall people for rowing. Rowers are tall, really, really tall. Basketball players are tall. I'm 6 foot, I'm too short for basketball. I'm actually way too short for volleyball. Women are 6'3", 6'4", okay?
Wow, who knew that? Who knew?
Some sports select for height. However, other sports don't select so powerfully. Marathon running, for example, you have women between 5'1" and 5'8" who have been world champions. running doesn't powerfully select for height. In fact, my rowing Olympic medalist friend is now an ultramarathoner, right? She runs like 80 kilometers all the time in Calgary in the winter. She comes home with like face full of ice. She's nuts. She's the best person ever. But what running does select for is extremely thin ankles.
Thin ankles? My son said niggas out here selected for thin ankles. Bruh, that's wild. Bruh. Ankle phrenology, bro. Bro, imagine, bro. Oh my God. Imagine niggas. I'm done.
And very light ankle bones, because the physics of swinging a pendulum is the lighter the end of the pendulum is, the easier it is. In the winter, she comes home with like face full of ice. She's nuts.
Man.
She's the best person ever.
That's funny.
But what running does select for is extremely thin ankles and very light ankle bones, because the physics of swinging a pendulum is the lighter the end of the pendulum is, the easier it is. So this one tribe in Kenya is massively overrepresented in distance running because they have a genetic predisposition for tiny, tiny ankles. There's a reason Kenyans are so good. One, they tend to live at altitude, but two, they...
Wow. This is why I appreciate people who do research and like they do this shit for a living, because they're like always smart about shit. Instead of saying like Kenyans is in the genetic source because they eat rice or whatever. She actually has like statistics on, no, actually it's because they're fucking they got thin ankles. Bro, how would you know that? Who is the nigga who thought about that? Who was like, yeah. I mean, I guess over time you kind of figure it out, but this is like wild to even think about how you would come to that conclusion.
happen to have the genetic features that make them perfect for distance running.
I mean, people used race. People used like they have a high carb diet. A lot of athletes have high carb diets, but whatever reason they could figure out to why Kenyans had did well in marathons, and it was the thin ankles the whole time. This shit's crazy.
That's a competitive advantage. Is it unfair? I can't run to save my life. Maybe if a grizzly's behind me. I'm just not good at it. My physiology is not built for running. I'm built for picking up heavy shit and putting it back down, right? I'm a power lifter on pedals. I cannot run. So these women have a huge competitive advantage over me depending on the sport and its physical demands. So the way that CAS thought about performance advantages, they said, while a 10% difference in athletic performance certainly justifies having separate male and female categories, by the way, I think I just proved that it doesn't. They say that a 1% difference may not justify a separation between athletes in the female category, given the many other relevant variables that also legitimately affect athletic performance. So what they said in the decision is, the number matters here. The relationship between testosterone and performance. If it's 10 to 12%, fine, you can exclude those women. I mean, I still think that's wrong, but that was their argument. But they said if it's like 1 to 3%, that is not enough of an advantage. We permit all these other advantages that are bigger than that. Okay, so what does the data show? So, what was really interesting in this case is Stefan Berman, who did this study. He tested in 2011 and 2013 in Daegu, South Korea, and Moscow, Russia, at 2 different IAAF World Championships. He tested over 2,100 athletes for their natural testosterone and then compared their performances against each other. And during the CAS testimony, he was the expert witness for the IAAF. The panel said, hey, so based on the data you have that isn't published yet, what do you think the advantage is for having higher testosterone? He's like, you know, I don't really know. I haven't really crunched all the numbers. I think it's around 3%. No joke. He basically shrugged and said, I don't know, about 3%. And that was when the decision, the case was over. Cass, in their decision, was like, you cannot be serious. That you made this policy based on a guess. And your guess was in the 3% range, not the 10 to 12 you're trying to say testosterone is responsible for. Go get better data.
That's weird, because why did Caster Semenya lose her case then? That's weird. I mean, I gotta look into that.
Okay, 2017 came, better data. Okay, so that's the data table. I'm not gonna make you read that.
Please.
One thing I do want you to notice, so what they did is they tested these 2,100 athletes, male and female, and then they looked at all the track and field events from the 100 meters all the way up to marathon. They looked at field events from like the hammer throw, the discus, to the heptathlon. And what they're doing is comparing the highest third of testosterone values in the athletes' performances compared to the lowest third. These are called tertiles, when you compare thirds to thirds. I have never seen a scientific study use tertiles before in my entire career. Nobody does it. Usually use quintiles, which are fifths, right? You talk about the top 20%, the bottom 20%. Quintiles, everyone uses quintiles, maybe quartiles. Why did they use tertiles? By the way, they won't release the data.
I was gonna have a corny seafood, whatever.
Yeah. We've asked multiple people, experts have asked for them to show us the data because we think if you run the data as quintiles, it shows no effect. Why did they use tertiles? By the way, they won't release the data. Yeah. We've asked multiple people, experts have asked for them to show us the data because we think if you run the data as quintiles, it shows no effect. But they use tertiles. Also, I want you to note this table. It does not represent the percentage differences between the high testosterone and low testosterone performances. And in the study, they only mentioned the highest positive advantages sports. They single out the ones with the highest positives. By looking at this, do you know that there's any negatives? Any disadvantages? No. No. I want to tell you a little something about testosterone. People talk about testosterone like it's the male hormone, that men have shitloads of it and only men have it. I swear, by the way, clear. And women don't have testosterone. Also, women have all the estrogen, men have none. And this is assuming trans people don't exist for a moment. Okay, so just assuming the false sex binary, just male and female, let's pretend people think only men have testosterone and men only have testosterone, only women have estrogen and women only have estrogen. That's false. So this is testosterone in a sample of like 800 people. It's not a massive sample, but it's pretty big. And here the blue values are the women's testosterone values. And they go from the bottom, where the average is about 1 nanomole per liter. These are different values, of course. These are picograms per milliliter. You can convert them. Boring. What you notice about the men's is it goes up to about 40 or so nanomoles per liter. Remember the policy was 10 nanomoles per liter? Where does the red boxes go down to? They go all the way down to the bottom of the female range too. Here's a surprise. 1/6 of IAAF World Championship level men are in the female range of testosterone. This Berman study found, and it says it in 2 sentences buried in the paper, they found no relationship between men for testosterone performance. None at all. Having higher natural...
Wait a minute. So if you have higher testosterone as a man, it's not really going. It don't really matter. Interesting.
Testosterone as a man conferred 0 advantage in any of the sports for men.
Hold on, that's absurd. Hold on, no.
Did you know that made men? Berman study.
Who is calling me? Hold on. Sorry, doctor's appointment.
And it says it in 2 sentences buried in the paper, they found no relationship between men for testosterone performance. None at all. Having higher natural testosterone as a man conferred 0 advantage in any of the sports for men.
Bro, this is the bullshit that niggas. You know how people argue over shit like this? That's insane, bro.
Did you know that many men had such natural low testosterone and yet were fully functioning elite athletes? No. Also, the value they report for the average females purposefully excludes any women over 5. So it's not a true average. In fact, Berman, in a follow-up paper, when they're talking about how these 2 graphs don't overlap at all, if you read like the footnote in the fine print, he says if we exclude these women who all have the higher numbers. So
is this science? What kind of science is this? I'm confused.
This is what we call complete overlap. The men's testosterone values completely overlaps the women's, and the women's mostly overlaps the men's. This is true of every natural physical characteristic. Pick one. Height, muscle cross-sectional area, bone density, every single graph looks like this. The men's completely overlaps the women's mostly overlaps the men's. What that means is the very tallest man is taller than the tallest woman by a little bit. But the difference between the shortest man and the tallest man is a hell of a lot bigger than the averages between men and women. And that is true of every characteristic, including testosterone.
So she's saying basically, I'm going to let her explain it, but yeah.
Here's another graph from a different study finding the same pattern. So the men's, you can't really see it, but it does go all the way down, okay? Men's testosterone, even elite athletes, goes down to next to nothing. Why is that? Because it's your sensitivity to testosterone that matters way more than how much you have. So testosterone's a hormone. It's a chemical signal to your body to do stuff. And testosterone does tons of stuff. It has roles in like 300 bodily processes just to be a healthy person. You have receptors in your cells for this chemical. If they are very sensitive to the presence of that chemical, you only need a little to get a huge effect. Also, there are people who are insensitive to testosterone, okay? By the way, like my body produces like no testosterone and I put on 20 pounds of muscle in 3 months. I'm just genetically predisposed to pack on muscle with no testosterone in my body. There's no relationship between these things. So back to this ridiculous thing that you can't read, I crunched all the percentages. I went in and did this, and here's what it looks like. Okay, let's go back for a moment. Which types of events, let's just talk about.
This is the key. This is the key part. Everybody's obsessed about the type of event.
Events. Do you think higher testosterone would be an advantage?
Sprinting,
right? The power short events. So, would it surprise you to know that in 100 meters, the 100-meter hurdles and the 200 meters, it was a disadvantage to have higher testosterone?
What? Bro. Son, that's wow. That's wild. Look at her face. She like, yeah, nigga. Yeah, y'all was so good on that bullshit. Ah. Shit, my neighbors. Sorry.
And they don't mention it in the paper.
Wow, bro. I got a screen cap that. That's wow. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. This is a screen cap. Oh, damn. I can't even. Oops. Oh, you can't even do it. Oh, yes, you can. Well, maybe. Fuck it, I'll do it later.
Remember, that table doesn't crunch the percentages for you. You have to do it yourself. And all of the reporting on this study and this Castro-Semenya case and testosterone, they all refer to this study, every single one of them. They're like, this study found advantages of testosterone. I'm like, yeah, but they didn't talk about the disadvantages anywhere.
Wow.
That's
I gotta try this one more time. I'm sorry. There it is. There it is. There it is, boys.
shit science and shit reporting. What are you doing?
Sure, bye.
And this Castro-Semenya case and testosterone, they all refer to this study, every single one of them. They're like, this study found advantages of testosterone. I'm like, yeah, but they didn't talk about the disadvantages anywhere. That's shit science and shit reporting. What are you doing? So the paper was very, in my opinion, purposefully misleadingly written for this end. Berman is the IAAF's guy, their science guy behind their testosterone policies. Right? He's not exactly neutral. And so Castro-Semenya's event is the 800 meters. Wait, I thought there's an advantage. Why are they trying to ban Castro-Semenya for having high testosterone? So what they did focus.
I mean, it does say. I mean, it only says 1.78. I mean, it does say advantage, but I don't. I mean, maybe I'm reading it wrong.
On was the 400 as an advantage. Why are they trying to ban Castro-Semenya for having high testosterone? So what they did focus on was the 400 meters, the 400 meter hurdles. The 800 was only like a small advantage. So they singled out these events and their new policy that was
okay. Spoke too soon.
Supposed to go into effect in last November, but is now being challenged in CAS. They said everything up to the mile, we're going to reduce the testosterone limit from 10 to 5 nanomoles per liter because of this study, because it showed an advantage. And I'm like, yeah, but what the fuck about these events? They're all negatives. Also, the events immediately after are all negative. And then suddenly the marathon's positive. What I want you to notice is that you could not have predicted which events would be which numbers. If I told you all these numbers were roughly between -3 and +3, and I said write down where you think they go, like pin the tail on the study, you would have been wrong. There's no pattern. So let's look at the field events. So you would think, naturally, power events like the hammer throw, these women are massive, right? And they're just throwing this like piece of lead on the end of a chain, caveman style. You would expect to see an advantage for having higher testosterone. That's a power event. But so is javelin. Javelin, you're like throwing this like spear down the field, maybe trying to hit an official. Right? That's a power event, and it showed a disadvantage. So they only singled out the positives, they completely neglected the negatives, and they never reported an average. So this is a slightly dubious number because you can't straightforwardly compute this average, but I did the best as I can because they won't give us the data. For the running events, it's 0.3% is the average advantage for having higher testosterone. For the field events, it's 1%. But what I really want to say to you is, if I had all of us flip a coin 10 times right now, some of us would have 7 or more coins come up heads, or 7 or more tails. I've done this in like my sports class. And suppose I said, okay, if the competition is who has the most heads at the end of the coin flipping competition, I'm like, but it's supposed to be 50-50, right? It's supposed to come up 5 heads, 5 tails, and you had 8. Okay, no one over 6 gets a prize. You're all excited.
I don't want to ban you, but I don't feel like arguing over people's humanity right now. So I'm just going to do that.
Excluded. But that's randomness. Who gets what? This data looks random.
Okay. Trans women are women, and there's no arguing about it on this channel. At least you can like find somewhere else to argue about it, but that's what that's what it is in this channel. Okay, I'm sorry you're gonna hurt your feelings, but it is what it is.
Randomly distributed around zero effect. And you had 8. Okay, no one over 6 gets a prize. You're all excluded. But that's randomness. Who gets what? This data looks randomly distributed around zero effect. This data, when you zoom into it and zoom out of it, looks like there's actually no effect, no net effect. This number of 0.3 or 1% could just be the randomness of the sample. They didn't show us that data either. So what I'm trying to say is, not only does the data actually show no relationship in men, but the relationship in women is unreliable and unpredictable. And in fact, I think it supports that there's no relationship in women either. So, I've tried to say that we permit competitive advantages larger than the 10 to 12% that we are attributing to testosterone between men and women, like height. Also, testosterone does not produce the advantages of 10 to 12%. So, a testosterone policy cannot be necessary or effective at promoting fairness in sport. The final prong that they had to
I put trans rights in the title just to attract people who want to learn about it, not fucking whatever.
pass was the proportionality test. A testosterone policy cannot be necessary or effective at promoting fairness in sport. The final prong that they had to pass was the proportionality test. So, it is true that intersex and trans women around the world are historically socioeconomically marginalized, particularly trans women of color, and particularly from the global south. And even in the States, it is perfectly legal in almost every state. If someone comes out as trans, you can fire them and evict them perfectly legally for being trans. And you can say this, and it's perfectly legal. So discrimination
That's what the Equality Act is all about. That will hopefully pass the Senate.
against an already marginalized group will not be proportional. So excluding an already marginalized group, trans intersex women, especially from the global south, most of the athletes that they're trying to exclude for high testosterone, Caster Semenya is from South Africa, Dudi Chand and a bunch of other sprinters are from India, they're from the global south, and they're women of color. That is not a coincidence. I'm not saying it's intentional, but we know how implicit biases work. So given that trans and intersex women, particularly women of color, are already heavily marginalized, excluding them from sport in the purposes of fairness based on testosterone cannot be proportional. So, this is why we think the right answer is that there should be no endogenous testosterone limit on women, just as there isn't on men. So, we think if someone were to bring a CAS case challenging the current IOC policy of 10 animals per liter, we think that the Court of Arbitration for Sport should decide that such a policy could not meet that justificatory burden of prima facie discrimination on the basis of a natural physical trait. But my co-author is a lawyer, and they like to be thorough, so she said, yeah, but they're human, so it's possible they could be like fine splitting stuff. They might say trans women who haven't taken any hormone therapy can't compete, but we're not going to require genital surgery. They could say, well, we are going to require this, but only to a certain amount. She said they could decide, like strictly speaking, different ways, but we think they should decide that no testosterone limit for women is permissible. So, to recap the argument, participation in sports is a human right. They don't do sex verification anymore. In its place, sex and gender is your legally recognized sex or gender. Trans women are legally recognized as women or female. Discrimination based on natural physical, so testosterone policies are discrimination on the basis of a natural physical trait. These female-female eligibility rules do not meet the justificatory burden, therefore no endogenous testosterone limit on women. Thank you.
Yeah, that was wild. Especially the part about about having more testosterone as a man didn't matter. That's just absurd. Really? Okay, so we know now that I am interested to see if she did if she what's that word called? Oh, talked about the Caster Semenya case. So I want to see if she wrote anything recently. Veronica Ivy. That was 1 year ago. This year. Is it Caster or Castor? Sounds off. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
World champion athlete Caster Semenya says her rights as a woman are being violated. The athlete has faced scrutiny about her gender throughout her career. Reporter Lindiwe Sitori sat down with the athlete to talk about some of these huge challenges.
A world champion, businesswoman and philanthropist. This is Caster Semenya. Throughout her 10-year career, she's had to deal with questions about her gender, people calling her a man and demanding that she undergo gender testing. The worst of all, she's battling a proposal by the International Association of Athletics Federations, which requires women with high testosterone levels to take medication to lower it. I sat down with the sportswoman for a quick chat.
So I think what we all want to know is, how have the past few months been for you, emotionally and also mentally during the court battles?
I think for me as a human, I was prepared for anything that comes, to me in this world. If we were to talk about mentally, I've learned how to, control the state of my mind on taking everything in and out. So if we were to talk about the situation, I don't think it was that much heavy for me. I think it will be heavy for people who are around me, you know, family.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like your rights as a woman were walked all over?
I think, of course, I felt that from the day one, from the beginning. Obviously, the day I was questioned, I was questioned if I'm a woman or I'm a man. Obviously, that's, to me, is a violation. For me, it's a disgrace. It's an insult, which is one thing for me, for sure. I can never be something I'm not.
How do you block out all this noise? What do you do? How do you find that inner peace?
Negativity to me does not exist, to be honest. From young, I think I grew up with a lot of people being negative in everything that you do. If you walk this direction, because they're not walking in that direction, they will say, no, you cannot succeed. Or they come and say, because you look a little bit like a boy, you can never be accepted in the world. No. If 10% of people in this world do not accept me for who I am, that don't mean nothing to me, because if 90% appreciate me for being who I am, and then they love the work that I do, so 10% is just nothing.
Staying true to her champion status, Semenya vows to forge ahead in her career, saying she knows she's the best. Linda Stolle, Johannesburg.
Not so fast. Champion runner Caster Semenya is ordered to take drugs to lower her testosterone if she wants to keep competing. Is the decision fair, or is it needed to ensure a level playing field in elite sport? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Caster Semenya is an inspiration to many women around the world, but the South African Olympic and world champion athlete is accused of having an unfair advantage because her body produces more male sex hormones than most females. To stay in the race, she's going to have to change her life. She's lost a legal challenge against the governing body of World Athletics, which issued a new rule forcing her to take drugs to lower her testosterone levels. Supporters say that ensures fair competition. Critics argue that Semenya is unfairly targeted because the rule only applies to middle-distance athletes like her. The Court of Arbitration for Sport admits the regulation is discriminatory, but say it's necessary. The president of the International Association of Athletics Federations praised the decision. Sebastian Coe is here in Doha for Friday's Diamond League event, where Semenya is due to compete.
I think this is pretty straightforward, and it's very straightforward for any international federation in sport. Athletics has two classifications. It has age, it has gender. We are fiercely protective about both, and I'm really grateful that the Court of Arbitration has upheld that principle.
Semenya's lawyers and the South African Athletics governing body are considering an appeal.
And we ourselves extremely disappointed in the outcome, because it's not correct to have a law which plays out in a way that nobody knows yet until it does play out. And you can't have the person who makes the law also be the person implementing the law and deciding how it plays out. So that is not the way we see fairness.
So what exactly is her condition? It's called hyperandrogenism, which causes her body to produce more of the male sex hormone testosterone than most women. Between 5 and 10% of females are thought to be affected. The UN says that up to 1.7% of babies worldwide are intersex, meaning they don't fit typical definitions of male and female. Testosterone boosts the amount of red blood cells, increases muscle mass and strength. Doctors are divided on how much it improves an athlete's performance. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from London, Silvia Camporesi, Senior Lecturer in Bioethics and Society at King's College London. From High Wycombe, on Skype, John Brewer, Professor of Applied Sports Science at Buckinghamshire New University. And also on Skype from Oxford, Julian Savulescu, Director of the Oxford Uhiro Centre for Practical Ethics at the University of Oxford. Welcome all to the programme. I would like to start with you, Dr. Silvia. Semenya was born a woman. It's not her fault that she has this imbalance of testosterone. Surely she should be allowed to compete. It's not an unfair advantage, is it?
You really touched an important point, because the discussion hinges on whether her advantage is unfair or not. And we just heard Sebastian Coe say that the case is straightforward, pretty straightforward, and actually is anything but straightforward, because it's quite complex. We need to distinguish whether the advantage derived from testosterone level is unfair or not. And this is not what the Court for Arbitration for Sport has done. The Court for Arbitration for Sport has requested the IAAF to investigate, to do research on levels of testosterone and performance advantage. And they come up with some results, which, by the way, have been demonstrated by several teams, including my team.
She's not even smoking these girls. They're like right behind her. Like,
to not be replicable, and this has been highlighted in the verdict of the Court for Arbitration for Sport, where they note of the difficulty on relying on a concrete advantage,
oh
but
yeah,
they
she's
do
smoking that one though. She's smoking this. They getting smoked.
on a theoretical advantage between levels of testosterone and performance. However, the point I've been making as a scholar working in ethics and sport, and as
Let me rewind.
my team to
Semenya was born a woman. It's not her fault that she has this imbalance of testosterone. Surely she should be allowed to compete. It's not an unfair advantage, is it?
You really touched an important point, because the discussion hinges on whether her advantage is unfair or not. And we just heard Sebastian Coe say that the case is straightforward, pretty straightforward, and actually is anything but straightforward, because it's quite complex. We need to distinguish whether the advantage derived from testosterone level is unfair or not. And this is not what the Court for Arbitration for Sport has done. The Court for Arbitration for Sport has requested the IAAF to investigate, to do research on levels of testosterone and performance advantage. And they come up with some results, which, by the way, have been demonstrated by several teams, including my team, to not be replicable. And this has been highlighted in the verdict of the Court for Arbitration for Sport, where they note of the difficulty on relying on a concrete advantage, but they do rely on a theoretical advantage between levels of testosterone and performance. However, the point I've been making as a scholar working in ethics and sport, and as a former runner, middle distance, so not a professional one, is that this advantage is not unfair.
Let me bring in John Brewer here, just right now from High Wycombe. It's not unfair, says Dr. Silvia Camparesso. She should be allowed to compete.
I think Sylvia's on exactly the whole problem with this case, and there's never likely to be any winners. I was in favour of commentary on it when the case first went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and it was clear right from the outset that this was a very difficult situation. Indeed, only yesterday, when you listened to the verdict that the CAS made, it was a majority verdict, it wasn't a unanimous one. And clearly, whilst they have come down and said that the testosterone levels need to be reduced, and let's remind ourselves it's not just within Caster Semenya, it's within all athletes, all female athletes, that they recommended. The recommendation the IAAF have made is that their testosterone levels should be reduced. So we're not just picking on one individual, although I can see why in a sense it seems that way. It is still a very grey area to the extent to which the levels of testosterone will influence performance. I think we have to bear in mind that, as Sylvia said, testosterone is a growth hormone. It causes, as you said at the outset, high levels of performance in terms of...
Right, but what we've just learned, there are things other than testosterone that confer a way bigger advantage, like height. And it depends on the sport. So, like, why are you hyper-focusing on testosterone? Doesn't make sense.
Muscle mass, and muscle mass will lead to extra strength and power. What we don't really know, because it is quite arbitrary, is the exact cut-off point at where that performance gain starts and where it stops. And I think particularly with female athletes, where we know that there are variations in hormonal levels on a monthly basis, and indeed when females are pregnant, for example, it is something that, again, as the Court of Arbitration for Sport said, is going to be very, very difficult to monitor and to police. And we'll just pick up on one point that you made about Caster Semenya not being allowed to compete. Of course, she will be allowed to compete, but only if she and other athletes with similar conditions can demonstrate that their testosterone level is lower. I was speaking on South African TV last night, as I was asked what the next step for her should be. I genuinely think that she now is such a great athlete that she has the ability and hopefully the desire to carry on with her training, carry on doing what she has done so well for so many years, and actually in some ways prove the doubters wrong by showing that she can still win on the World Olympic stage, still win gold medals and break world records, even with a potentially low...
Son, they didn't tell Michael Phelps he had to, like, start smoking cigarettes because he has higher lung capacity than all the rest of the motherfuckers. They didn't say that. They say, yo, he's winning too much. You got to start smoking cigarettes. So that's how we really know. That's how we really know if your training is really what's doing it and not your big ass lungs. It's that bullshit.
Level of testosterone. Of course, she may also decide in parallel that to submit an appeal. But I believe she is a great runner, a great athlete, and that actually will, in a sense, be borne out even with a slightly lower level of testosterone.
Well, what we're asking her to do, and other athletes in her position to do, is to take performance-reducing drugs. Now, performance enhancing.
Oh, a second. My volume is super fucking low.
Drugs are banned from the sport completely. So this seems to be an ethical question. Let's bring in Julian Savulescu in Oxford here. What's the morality of all of this? We're actually, in effect, asking somebody at the top of their game to not be at the top of their game. Is that what we're doing?
Well, as we exactly are, what Sylvia correctly pointed out is whether this level of testosterone represents an unfair advantage, and if it does, what you should do about it. So with respect to the first question, I completely agree with her that the science hasn't established the degree to which her elevated testosterone level provides her with an unfair advantage. You've got to remember that she probably has a condition which means the receptors for testosterone don't work properly. We don't know what a normal level of testosterone would be for her. We don't know how her body functions, or indeed her brain functions, under this level of testosterone. So even if you reduce her performance by reducing her testosterone, it could be due to effects on her brain, it could be due to the side effects of the drugs, it could be due to a whole bunch of different factors. And unless you can give a really accurate story about what biological features we're entitled to and what we're not, and how testosterone works in a...
Yeah, that's right. Are you entitled to your height? No, nigga, you gotta cut them shits off, brother. Cut them legs off, man. You too tall for basketball, my guy. I'm sorry. Will Chamberlain, yo, you too tall, my nigga. I'm sorry. You need to cut like 2 feet off. Not 2 feet. Cut like a foot off yourself and see if you can really still ball. That's how we will know. That's how we will know. All right.
Complex situation like this, you shouldn't be ruining somebody's career or life. Which brings me to the second point, that what biological features we're entitled to and what we're not, and how testosterone works in a complex situation like this, you shouldn't be ruining somebody's career or life. Which brings me to the second point, that even if you thought there might be some significant advantage, this woman has been brought up under a current set of rules. She's trained, she's been treated as a woman, she's been allowed to compete, and to change those rules midway through her career denies her the right to work and the right to live effectively. A much better solution would have been to introduce rules that affected athletes in the future, for example, when they're about to start their career, not midway through their career, a so-called grandmother clause. But the problem altogether is this so-called level hormonal playing field, which the CAS and the IAAF want to establish, isn't really a level playing field, because you don't know the response of the receptors to testosterone, you don't know the complex biology of the individual athletes, and that story simply hasn't been worked out.
So, Dr. Sylvia, let me bring you in.
My son's spitting bars. He like, nigga, we don't know. This is bullshit.
Yeah, Dr. Sylvia, the science seems to be problematic. So why not, as Julian Savulescu said, allow her to compete whilst you figure out the science?
Yes, definitely that could have been an option. Indeed, I mean, I must say, so I was expecting like everybody else the verdict yesterday. I was disappointed but not surprised. And I think it's important, so this is such a complex and not straightforward issue, that to understand yesterday's verdict, one needs to go back a few years and understand Duty Chand case. So Duty Chand was an Indian sprinter also targeted by the former hyperandrogenism regulation, which were put in place in 2011 in response to Caster Semenya's case. So you have a case that goes back 10 years. So you had Caster Semenya at the Berlin World Championship 2009, but she was not able to appeal to the hyperandrogenism regulations that required her to lower the testosterone level. Then, thanks to Duty Chand, who appealed to the Court for Arbitration of Sport, the regulations were suspended in 2015 on grounds that there was not enough evidence about the correlation. However, as I had noted in 2015, the grounds on which the regulation were suspended were the wrong grounds, and let me explain why. Court for Arbitration for Sport in 2015 wrote very clearly that they believe the IAAF had reasons to have this regulation, that this regulation were necessary. This language echoes yesterday's language about necessary discrimination. But in 2015, CAS ruled that there was not enough evidence about the proportionality of the regulation. Now, the IAAF was given 2 years to do this additional research, which they submitted. It was mostly the new regulation, which targeted a restricted set of events from the 400-meter to the mile, were based on a study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2017, which identified this middle distance event as events in which women with high level of testosterone had a higher performance advantage. However, this study results had not been replicated, and actually, as I was saying, with Simon Franklin at the London School of Economics and Jonathan Ospina Betancourt at the University of Brighton and Spain, Burgos University, we've been able to show that the results cannot be replicated. So why these 5 events? I think it's fair to say that Caster Semenya has been targeted. Now, I would be curious to see if Caster Semenya starts competing in a different event with the IAAF regulation change. The IAAF has called the regulation a living document. CAS, yesterday in the verdict, they had advised to defer the application of the regulation on grounds that is of the difficulty on relying on concrete evidence of an advantage. However, IAAF is quite ironic, but sad, they have not really taken up the advice to defer the application of the regulation. They given athletes 1 week to lower their testosterone level in order to compete on May 8th.
So you're saying it's very unfair. Let me bring in John Brewer here. This is sport. Sport is supposed to be fair. These IAAF regulations, these rulings, are designed for a level playing field, and it's designed on age and on sex. Is it time to take a real hard look at that and to try and come up with a different definition? Or is it simply, we've got to draw the line in the sand somewhere?
Yeah, I think we have to almost think more broadly than that and look at the whole integrity of sport and what do people want from the sport that they watch. And indeed, the sport, many millions of pounds is invested in through broadcasting rights, through sponsorship deals and so on. And I think I am bitterly sad and sorry for athletes such as Caster Semenya, who are looking, as we've already said, at their careers and wondering whether they can carry on competing. At the same time, and the things I don't agree with Lord Cohen, but on this occasion I can see where Seb's coming from, in the sense that we do have to create an environment that enables female athletes who don't have abnormally high levels of testosterone to feel that they can excel, compete, and do extremely well in female
Bruh, if you are a 5'2" man, we got to make you feel like you got a chance to be in the NBA? Why? Nigga, you're not going to make it. It's unlikely. Why don't we just... That's what I'm trying to understand. We don't make it fair. It's not fair. Some people have the inherent biological advantage. If you are 6'9", LeBron, 250 pounds, can run a 4.4. I mean, I'm sorry.
And we only have to look over the last 20 or 30 years at the way in which
So the idea that we just have to make sure that every little boy and girl knows they have a chance. No. I mean, train hard, see what happens, but like she said, if you're a 6'5" woman, you're not gonna have no chance in gymnastics. It's over for you. Wrap it up. Choose another sport. It's like if you're a dude that's 5'2", I'm sure there's something you could do. You could do gymnastics. You could do something else. But this is that false notion that we have to make sure that the little boys and girls and MBs, we don't even know where we put those. Like they're not even in sports. That they have a chance to win. That's a lie. It's a lie. Why are we telling lies out here?
Female sport has grown and developed and had much greater levels of participation, much greater levels of sponsorship, much greater levels of coverage, and that is absolutely to be welcomed. I think we also need to bear in mind that the issue with Caster Semenya, and again, we'll come back to this inevitably, it seems as if it's targeting her as an individual. It is, as I said earlier...
Hold on 1 second.
Something that affects all athletes with hyperandrogenism, but it's also to some extent being clouded with another very difficult issue, and that is the one of transgender athletes, and in particular males who go through sexual reorientation, sexual transition to become females and compete as females. And part of the reason why the IAAF and other people are looking at testosterone levels is a way to, again, level that playing field, to ensure that when an athlete does go through a sexual reallocation transition, that they have a testosterone level that at least puts them in a category or at a level where they can compete alongside of the female athletes. It's an extremely difficult area, and as I said earlier, one that there probably will be no winners within. But I do believe that we have to protect the integrity of sport. At the same time, as Sylvia has rightly said, there is still a lot of research that we need to do to work out exactly what the cutoff level is. But bear in mind that testosterone, in a different...
Son, they did not ban Michael Phelps from playing sports. The integrity, nothing happened. He just won like 38 awards, 38 gold medals, and everybody said he's the greatest. That's it. Nobody said, yo, smoke cigarettes, my guy. Your lungs are too good.
Way when it's measured is banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency because of its performance-enhancing effects. So we know that forms of variants of testosterone itself will enhance performance. What we're not quite...
Let me look that stat up because I keep hearing about the Michael Phelps lung shit, and I want to make sure that's true.
Is exactly what those levels are. So this is in a sense a fairly crude tool. It's certainly one that there needs to be more work and research done to really get just right. And inevitably in this situation, it's not going to be a win-win for everybody. There are going to be some winners and some losers. And I think what we have to do is to have these sorts of discussions in a very level-headed and pragmatic way to come up with the best solution for both individuals and for sport as a whole, and indeed for society as well.
Julian Savulescu, John Brewer brings up a very interesting point there. I just want to ask you a very direct question. Are we now in a position where we're trying to
Son, Michael Phelps, I'm just going to do it. He has the perfect body for swimming. He has the perfect body for swimming is what they're saying. His legs resemble flippers. What the fuck? No, I don't want to subscribe. Jesus fucking Christ. These advertisements. Bruh. He's the most decorated athlete of all time. What gives? He has long torso and short legs. So this thing has every single advantage. His disproportionately large chest to power himself through water with each stroke. His wingspan is longer than his height. Where's the lung part? He's double jointed, so he could. Bro, this nigga has every advantage, bro. They should. So this should just beat this nigga up for every. They should beat him up before every swim, whatever it's called. You know. He's double jetted. He has large paddles, extra long, like propellers to shoot him through the water. Bro, he shouldn't be allowed to compete. How can other people, other men in this category, have a feeling that they have a chance with this man's physical attributes are like this? It's unfair. He produces less. Look, yo, bro, my son got every advantage. Nah, see, look. Our bodies produce lactic acid as source. Okay, he has less of that. Half, son, half. You have no chance. You have no chance. You have no chance. You could train all you want. It's over for you, man. You're gonna lose, and they did lose. And he has twice the size lung capacity, bruh. You are not winning these races, my nigga. It's over. Myself with my regular lung capacity, well, it's over. I'm not catching this man. Wow. Oh, many top swimmers share this physical. All right, but still, what about me? Why can't I swim? I want to swim. I got regular lung size, or I don't know where my lung size is. Maybe it's higher, but still, where's the fairness for sport for me and people like me who have, and all the people who don't have twice the human? What about us? We don't confer that advantage, so it's that bullshit. It's that bullshit. Anyway, so this nigga got mad physical advantage, half the last guy. He got long legs, all that bullshit. So, whatever. We could just exit out of that.
Well, we had thought, ma'am, that.
Yeah, it's gonna take too long to figure out. Maybe it is this one. Where's my history?
As rightly said, there is still a lot of research that we need to do to work out exactly what the cutoff level is. But bear in mind that testosterone, in a different way when it's measured, is banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency because of its performance-enhancing effects. So that we know that forms of variants of testosterone itself will enhance performance. What we're not quite clear on is exactly what those levels are. So this is, in a sense, a fairly crude tool. It's certainly one that there needs to be more work and research done to really get just right. And inevitably in this situation, it's not going to be a win-win for everybody. There are going to be some winners and some losers. And I think what we have to do is to have these sorts of discussions in a very level-headed and pragmatic way to come up with the best solution for both individuals and for sport as a whole, and indeed for society as well.
Julian Savulescu, John Brewer brings up a very interesting point there. I just want to ask you a very direct question. Are we now in a position where we're trying to regulate the human body, where we're trying to legislate the human body and what it's capable of doing? And surely that's bad for the sport. This is naturally occurring in Caster Semenya. Perhaps it's naturally occurring in other people. It just means that they can compete at that level.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. It's inconsistent with the logic of sport as it currently stands, that you're meant to be testing an individual's natural potential, but you're trying to reduce their natural potential with testosterone-lowering drugs. You have to remember that the definition of a woman used to be, until the 90s, having two X chromosomes. If that had continued to be the definition, Caster Semenya wouldn't have been allowed to compete, because she probably has a condition where she has a Y chromosome, an androgen insensitivity. Now, she didn't make the decision to change that definition. It was made by the sporting authorities. And so they moved to an anatomical definition of what it is to be a woman, which she conforms to. Anatomically, she's a woman. She has a female appearance, even though she may have internal testes, and those are producing testosterone. So they chose to move to a different definition of woman, and within that definition, she is completely natural. That's not her decision. She's conformed to the rules. I completely agree we have to have a set of rules, but there'll always be grey cases, and you shouldn't be disadvantaging people who have conformed to the rules, and you decide to change them midway through. It's important to recognise that this decision doesn't apply to all intersex conditions. It applies to only those people with XY chromosomes who also have high levels of testosterone. But there are other women and other conditions in intersex that produce high levels of testosterone that aren't covered by this judgment. So she is being discriminated against very clearly, even amongst intersex athletes.
I was reading a very interesting article. Dr. Sylvia, I just want to bring you in here. A very interesting article that suggested that the people running sport are
estrogen insensitivity. Now, she didn't make the decision to change that definition. It was made by the sporting authorities. And so they moved to an anatomical definition of what it is to be a woman, which she conforms to. Anatomically, she's a woman. She has a female appearance, even though she may have internal testes, and those are producing testosterone. So they chose to move to a different definition of woman, and within that definition, she is completely natural. That's not her decision. She's conformed to the rules. I completely agree we have to have a set of rules, but there'll always be grey cases, and you shouldn't be disadvantaging people who have conformed to the rules, and you decide to change them midway through. It's important to recognise that this decision doesn't apply to all intersex conditions. It applies to only those people with XY chromosomes who also have high levels of testosterone. But there are other women and other conditions in intersex that produce high levels of testosterone that aren't covered by this judgment. So she is being discriminated against very clearly, even amongst intersex athletes.
I was reading a very interesting article. Dr. Sylvia, I just want to bring you in here. A very interesting article that suggested that the people running sport are overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly white, and overwhelmingly over the age of 60. So their definition of what is a man, what is a woman, is very set in stone and perhaps a little old-fashioned. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
This has definitely something to do with it. In fact, already in 2012, with my co-authors at Stanford University, we wrote an article for the American Journal of Bioethics where we were targeting the hyperandrogenism regulation, and we pointed out how there were different levels of unfairness in the regulation, including the way they were being drafted and implemented, and looking at the kind of people that were making this decision. I think it's really important to distinguish the point of whether is this advantage unfair or not. Back to 2015, in order to understand today's case, CAS could have ruled in a different way. Indeed, I'm really curious to read the 160 pages of the entire verdict when they are published, because it says that it was ruled by majority. So I understand this as there was a minority that didn't agree with the ruling. What this means is that CAS did not engage with the question on, is an advantage given by testosterone unfair? Now, let me give you an example about other natural advantages. There are natural conditions, mutations in a hemoglobin receptor gene. If you have one of these mutations, you produce a higher level of red blood cells. The red blood cell carry oxygen in our body. If you have about 50% more red blood cell in your body than another athlete, it's like being naturally doped. You have natural doping. And we have cases of athletes who had this mutation and had an advantage in competition. The Finnish skier Matti Ranta is a famous example. In the 61 gold medals and Innsbruck Winter Olympics with an advantage of 40 or 45 seconds on the silver medalist, which is a huge advantage, but that was not considered unfair. It was clearly an advantage, and as it may be the case that testosterone is an advantage. However, I think the science underlying the advantage conferred by testosterone is less robust. So
let me bring in John Brewer here. John, I just want to ask you the same question that I asked Dr. Sylvia. Is sports management, sports ruling elite, overwhelmingly old-fashioned and simply out of touch with everything that's going on in the modern world?
That's a good question, and I can see why you would make that, because if you look at the composition of many national federations, national governing bodies of sport, then sadly I think you're very right that there is an overpreponderance of males, middle-aged males, people like myself, dare I say. Whether they're out of touch or not, though, I would tend to argue against. And I think one of the potential implications of this ruling is that we will see those in other federations start to look at what's happened within athletics and wonder whether the same ruling would be applied to their particular sport and their particular federation. So I think over time we may actually see that this starts to extend, and there will be those, particularly in team sports, where you'll have 12, 15 individuals all competing in a team against another team. There is more likelihood, perhaps, that we will see those national federations deciding that they would try to apply similar regulations. So whether that means that they're out of touch or not, I don't know. I can't really be absolutely certain on that. But at the same time, I look at the way in which sport has evolved over the years. And again, if you look at the Olympic Games, which has involved many more new sports, younger sports, if you like, if you look at the growth of the Winter Olympics and indeed the Paralympics, what I think we are seeing globally is, in a sense, a revolution in sports that are seen now to be mainstream. And along with that, I do think that we are getting much younger, much more vibrant people at the head of those sports, and hopefully a greater awareness of what's happening in the real world. But I wouldn't.
We are running out of time, and I would like to ask the final question to Julian Savulescu, just very quickly. This is the same question. Are the sports governing bodies out of touch? Is the science developing far too quickly? Is this a problem for athletes like Caster Semenya?
It doesn't have to out of touch. Like, if they're not listening to the science, then
it's simply that the world is changing and the sports governing bodies aren't keeping up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the science is rapidly emerging. It's very complex. It's probabilistic. And they're not aware of how to deal with the ethical issues, and they don't have an ethical framework that's satisfactory for the complexity of the issues. But I think there are two other issues here. I think they're worried about opening the floodgates to transgender athletes. I think that's exactly right. And they're also worrying about encouraging doping using testosterone in normal athletes, that this will be an encouragement to use doping in order to compete with intersex athletes. And both of those are legitimate concerns, but they're separate issues. And I don't think Caster Semenya should be a scapegoat.
Sadly, we are out of time. Thank you very much to all.
Niggas say, yeah, I feel you, but that's interesting. Let's see what Pelosi has to say. Is she talking yet? She is not. Ooh, they about to do the For the People Act. Interesting. But yeah, let's go back to this, because apparently there is some tea in this one.
Matter of 3 hours and 19 minutes, I think as Senator Portman said. The question is, was the delay caused, in your judgment, from being on these various phone calls by anything remotely resembling politics and a desire not to interfere with this particular group? Or was it because of I think the word blowback has been used, the concerns about what had happened in the summer and the criticism that the Guard had taken for its actions at Lafayette
I mean, please.
Square or in other parts of the protests of the summer? What do you think was going on here in terms of why this matter took so long to respond to?
Because they're white people, my nigga. White.
Senator King, I think it was a combination of both. In my judgment, it was two factors. So I had the benefit and comfort of having the Secretary of the Army co-located with me during the summer. So he was right next to me for pretty much that entire week, the first week of June. And I was in constant communication with him. I had his phone number, he had mine, and we communicated regularly. I didn't have that benefit for January 6th. So there was some concern. I don't think it was so much of what the District of Columbia National Guard and Guard Nation did for June. I think it was more the word that I kept hearing was the optics of it. And there was concern that it could inflame the protesters. So
oh, really? It could inflame the protesters. Wow. So you thought the Blue Lives Matter crowd wouldn't respect the police? I'm confused.
On presence of guardsmen, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force uniforms could inflame the protesters. That was a concern as well. That was a thought by Army senior leaders.
Bro, the shit that white people get away with, bro. What the fuck is playing? Oh, that's Nancy Pelosi. I was like, who is this in the background? Actually, this is important. We have to go back. Yeah, got a lot of shit to watch. But the shit that white people get over, they said, bruh, I'm wow.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are here to wave the American flag and all that it stands for. We're so proud of so many of our members who have taken this fight for our democracy to the floor of the House and across the country. I want to salute in particular Chairman John Sarbanes, who has been such a leader over the years in fighting for our democracy. We'll hear from him momentarily. Zoe Lofgren, the chair of the Committee of Jurisdiction, House Administration Committee, who's worked so hard on this legislation. You'll hear from them and other members, but I also want to acknowledge Terry Sewell, who has an important part of this bill in H.R. 4, which is the Voting Rights Act, an important part of that. So here we are, I sat on the floor. This reminds me of what it must have felt like at Valley Forge. Everything is at stake. We must win this race, this fight for this
This is all true.
bill. Because at the same time as we are gathering here to honor our democracy across the country, over 200 bills are being put together, provisions are putting forth to suppress the vote. To suppress the vote, how could it be? How do we pledge allegiance to the flag in this capital, this temple of democracy, while at the same time supporting voter suppression across the country? So what we are doing in this fight that we're engaged in is to empower the people. This is called the For the People bill. And in doing so, we combat big, dark, special interest money in politics and amplify the voice of the American people. We fight foreign interference in our elections. Foreign interference in our elections. We expand voting rights. We fight political gerrymandering, and we crack down on corruption. The bill, as Mr. Sarbanes says, caffeinates every other issue because it gives people confidence that if we come down on the side of the people's interest, not the special interest, we will be able to have policies that are for the people. Policies to help us build back better, to end a pandemic and address economic disparities, end gun violence, and by promoting gun violence prevention, which we hope to do shortly, to have a national reckoning on racial injustice and to address the surging climate crisis, just to name a few issues that are affected, and again, to raise the minimum wage, just to address a few issues that are affected by big, dark money weighing in the Capitol. So today, members of Congress will have a choice. They will have a choice to vote for the people's interest and expanding the voices of the American people, or to vote with the special interest and further empowering big, dark money which suffocates the system. The person who has done so much to give us that choice today is the chair of the task force that brings us this For the People, H.R. 1, of primary importance to us, John Sarbanes from the great state of Maryland. Mr. Sarbanes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you for designating the For the People Act, H.R. 1, and thank you for entrusting this caucus to assemble a transformative set of democracy reforms that we can give to the American people. Over the last few years, we know, you know, the people have become deeply cynical about politics and government. They don't see their voice represented in the system. They've said to us, first, we want to get to the ballot box every 2 years without having to run an obstacle course. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, you just want to be able to cast your vote in America and have that be easy and convenient and straightforward. We address that in H.R. 1. They said to us, when you get to Washington, act right, behave, be ethical, be accountable, be transparent. And we have a whole set of reforms in H.R. 1 that would do that. And they pleaded with us Don't get tangled up in the money. Remember where you came from. Remember who you work for. Fight for our interests, for the public interest, not for the special interests and the big money. And we have a set of robust reforms that pushes back against the influence of big money. H.R. 1 is designed to restore the voices of Americans who felt left out and locked out for too long. We are excited about the opportunity before us. We are going to push as hard as we can to get this over the finish line. That begins today here in the House with the passage of H.R. 1. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the person who's done more than anybody in terms of the brass tacks of pulling this bill together, getting it through the House, getting it onto the floor, Zoe Lofgren, the chair of the House Administration Committee. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, John. We would not be here today without John Sarbanes and Speaker Pelosi, and that we are here today is extremely important. You know, in this face of the pandemic, a lot of jurisdictions made it easier for people to vote. They engaged in no excuse absentee voting. They engaged in early voting. And what did we see? The largest number of Americans voting in modern history. More Republicans voted, more Democrats voted, and you know who won? The American people won. Because when people participate and own their own government, that's what we need in our country. So H.R. 1 really is to preserve the opportunity for people to vote. After that enormous turnout, we saw Republican legislatures all over the country try and stop that voting, to stop the absentee voting, to impose barriers, to make it harder for Americans to vote. H.R. 1 would put a stop to that. And it's absolutely essential because nothing else happens unless the people's voices are heard. We are not going to address climate change unless the American people get to vote. We're not going to have a $15 an hour minimum wage unless the American people get to vote. So I hope that for all their cynical arguments against it, some of our friends across the aisle will get a grip and understand that it is in everyone's interest when all Americans have the chance to cast their vote and choose their own government. At this point, I would like to recognize someone who was elected for the seat held by our beloved John Lewis. The first 300 pages of this bill were written by John Lewis, and Congresswoman Williams is now representing his district.
In my home state of Georgia, Republican state legislators have unleashed an unprecedented torrent of voter oppression schemes to make it incredibly hard to vote and to silence our voices, especially communities of color. As we saw in the 2020 election and in the 2021 runoff election, Georgians are not afraid to fight daily for what so many take for granted in this country, including the right to vote. But the sad part is, y'all, we shouldn't have to. No one should be subjected to the daily threats of their rights being taken away. H.R. 1, the For the People Act, would put a stop to the voter suppression that we're seeing being debated right now in Georgia by taking an aim at the institutional barriers to voting. H.R. 1 would also create a national standard for voter registration because your zip code should not determine your access to the ballot box. I'm proud to support H.R. 1 and uplift the voices of Georgians who are right now being silenced due to voter suppression. I'm also incredibly honored to support this bill because 300 pages of it were written by my friend, my predecessor, my mentor, Congressman John Lewis. And let me be clear, y'all, this bill is the good trouble that he fought for his entire life. Mr. Lewis authored Title I of H.R. 1, and his legacy graces the historic reform efforts in this bill. We must honor his legacy by passing this monumental legislation, and I am honored to be upholding his legacy today in Georgia's 5th Congressional District.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me say I'm out of Orange County, California, and if you want to have a lesson on voter suppression, come down to Orange County. We'll talk about it. A cup of coffee will get you about an hour's lecture. But today, I want to thank Madam Speaker, Mr. Sarbanes, and so many, many others that are standing here today for all the good work on free and fair elections. And all of you are going to listen to a lot of debate, a lot of discussion on
That's a sleeper. I'm sorry. We'll wait until it it's over, so we can watch it at 2x speed.
Region, because there's
some details that come afterwards that if you're reading through it, you could then elevate it. And as you've heard, some members on this committee and others in the media have pulled out specific statements buried in a report and pulled it out and said, well, how could you have missed this?
Right.
But in the bottom line up front, it looks very standard. Here are the risks, here are the things that we're seeing. There doesn't seem to be something that would say, hey, this is higher than normal. If I can use the intel term, it seems to be chatter. Even in the report itself, it identifies multiple places. This was one person on a social media site, and they had one comment that they made on it. That would make someone think this is one person out there saying this doesn't look like a movement that's happening. So if that was accurate, to say we're hearing some chatter on that, there has to be some way to be able to note that for the future, to be able to say elevated, more so than normal, higher than it was a week ago, some way to be able to show a trend line, whether it's bottom line up front all the way through to say it's increasing in awareness on this. And that is something that is fixable. I would tell you my challenge from serving on the Intel Committee is seeing different reports that come through that are so carefully scripted, they say nothing. So getting as many pieces of raw information as possible, which are in some of these reports, but then to also make sure that the assessments and the statements are very, very clear will help everyone in the process. We do reach moments where it becomes so politicized that we've got to be able to turn down the volume of that particular word that at the end of it they don't say anything. General, can I ask you a question on this as well? For any of the operations that Washington, D.C. has, or that you know of for other National Guard members, in any operation that you're going to be around, and you had obviously soldiers that were involved scattered around the city helping with traffic duties and such during the day, do you get the threat assessments in advance, the same as what Capitol Police, Metro Police would get? Because obviously you're assisting Metro Police, so would you get the same threat assessments that they get as they're leading up to the event, so that you would have that for that event as well?
Yes, Senator, we do receive finished intelligence products.
Okay. Are those helpful to you?
They are.
Good. Is there anything that you're missing when you go through those reports that you wish was there?
No, sir.
Yeah. We would all love to see 2020 into the future. I get that completely. You've made several comments through the course of the day today that I've noted, and then in your statement itself, where you stated the Secretary of Army's January 5th letter withheld authority for me to employ the Quick Reaction Force. Now, we've talked about that, and several of us have brought it up. I want to ask a question for the folks that were actually on traffic duty and such that were helping out that day and standing side by side with Metro Police to help them. Were those folks armed with less lethal implements to be able to help in case there was a riot situation or an unruly crowd? Could they have engaged from where they were with less than lethal force?
So they weren't equipped with less than lethal, but they were equipped with force protection, helmets, shin guards, body protection.
Were they wearing those, or were those in the vehicles?
They were in the vehicles.
They were in the vehicles. And those, my understanding was, where those weren't military vehicles that day, they were to be unmarked vehicles that were other government vehicles. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. They were GSA vehicles.
Got it. And then there was no overhead for your folks that were out that day. My understanding is there was a request from the mayor to not have military vehicles, to not have helicopters up in the air that day in support. Would that have typically been something that you would have asked for in the past, to be able to have some kind of overhead for a day like that?
No, sir. We would not have needed helicopters or any kind of air support for a mission like that. Just simple traffic control. And the Quick Reaction Force was available to support them if they needed it.
But they are physically how far away? As far as minutes, I don't have to say where they were exactly.
About 25 minutes away.
So the Quick Reaction Force was 25 minutes away. Even if it was go, we need you to be able to respond. It's 25 minutes on a good traffic situation to be able to get there, barring what's happening with the crowd.
Well, we would have had a police escort. So the District of Columbia has military police and security forces. Both have marked police vehicles with the emergency equipment, like sirens.
Right. And just to clarify, that's 40 individuals in that Quick Reaction Force.
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Next up, Senator King from the Rules Committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks for holding this hearing. A quick question for Mr. Solisas. I know the Defense Department has its own intelligence service, the DIA, and this is a question for the record. I would appreciate it if you would check and provide to the committee whatever there are in the way of intelligence products that were available to the Department of Defense in the week prior to, and particularly the day prior to January 6th. And they can be submitted in a classified setting if there are issues of sources and methods. I don't know if there's any such material, but if there is, I hope you will make it available to the committee. General Walker, you're a very important witness today because you were in the midst of all of this and you were in touch. And what we're really struggling with here is why that long delay. And you testified earlier that in the summer, the delay was a matter of minutes. This time, it was a matter of 3 hours and 19 minutes, I think as Senator Portman said. The question is, was the delay caused, in your judgment, from being on these various phone calls by anything remotely resembling politics and a desire not to interfere with this particular group, or was it because of the, I think the word blowback has been used, the concerns about what had happened in the summer and the criticism that the Guard had taken for its actions at Lafayette Square or in other parts of the protests of the summer? What do you think was going on here in terms of why this matter took so long to respond to?
So, Senator King, I think it was a combination of both. In my judgment, it was two factors. So I had the benefit and comfort of having the Secretary of the Army co-located with me during the summer. So he was right next to me for pretty much that entire week, the first week of June. And I was in constant communication with him. I had his phone number, he had mine, and we communicated regularly. I didn't have that benefit for January 6th. So there was some concern. I don't think it was so much of what the District of Columbia National Guard and Guard Nation did for June. I think it was more the word that I kept hearing was the optics of it. And there was a concern that it could inflame the protesters. So a uniform presence of guardsmen, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force uniforms could inflame the protesters. That was a concern as well. That was a thought by Army senior leaders.
And the optics that you mentioned, that's sort of, in this context, become a bit of a pejorative term. But what they were really worried about, in my understanding, is the visuals of armed troops and military vehicles and barriers surrounding the United States Capitol. Ironically, that's what we ended up with. But is that the concern that you discerned in those conversations?
Well, Senator, nobody was talking about being armed on January 6th. We were talking about physical presence, civil disturbance, equipped guardsmen to form a line with the United States Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police to restore order and prevent the Capitol from being breached.
But there's no question that the day before, or the days before, the city made it clear that they did not want the National Guard at the Capitol. Is that accurate?
No, sir. The city doesn't have standing at the Capitol. So the city, the mayor's request and the director of Homeland Security, Dr. Rodriguez's request, did not talk about the Capitol at all.
Okay, so the request from the city was directed toward the traffic control and those kinds of things away from the Capitol.
Yes, sir.
Let's move from history to what we learned from this. In your view, should there be changes in the process or changes in the chain of command in an emergency situation to enable the National Guard, whether it's you here in the District of Columbia or a National Guard unit in New York or San Francisco or Austin, Texas, should this be something that we're concerned about? The 3 hours of reaction in a true emergency situation seems to be something we need to figure out how to avoid.
If I can answer it two ways, I think you should be concerned that Chief Son was not allowed to contact me and ask for help in advance. So then we could have had the right forces positioned to support the Capitol Police and protect the Capitol. That's one. Number two, the request did take too long. The response to the request took too long. So I think there needs to be a study done to make sure that never happens again. It shouldn't take 3 hours to either say yes or no to a urgent request from either the Capitol Police, the Park Police, the Metropolitan Police Department. In an event like that where everybody saw it, it should not take 3 hours. But before that would have happened, I think the Capitol Police should have been empowered to request National Guard assistance in enough time that we would have been there ready to have a large quick reaction force sitting possibly at the Armory, possibly closer, to be ready to respond and not be late to need.
So the limitation on the Capitol Police ability to liaise with you prior to the event was an issue. But I want to get to the larger issue of being able to react. And should we have a contingency plan? Should there be an after-action assessment within the Department of Defense about those 3 hours and how to empower the local leadership, such as yourself, to react in an extraordinary emergency so that you don't have to go through whatever it was that caused the delay, whether it was communication or chain of command or consultation. But clearly, again, this could be an emergency in another city under entirely different circumstances. Don't you think it would be prudent for us to have a contingency plans that would be more expeditious?
So emergency authority to act in an emergency, to witness what occurred and to be able to respond, yes, I think going forward, somebody should consider, at the Department of Defense, should consider how the District of Columbia National Guard is able to respond in a much more expeditious manner.
Or the National Guard in other parts of the country. Thank you very much, General, for your testimony. Thanks to all of you, and thank you, Madam Chair, for this important hearing.
Thank you. During today's testimony, two memos have been discussed, one on January 4th and one on January 5th, from Brian McCarthy to Major General William Walker. One of those documents have already been entered into the record. Without objection, I'd like to enter the memo dated the 5th of January, 2021, from Brian McCarthy to General Walker. Without objection, be entered. With that, Senator Carper, you are recognized for your questions.
Thanks. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can, loud and clear.
Good. Thanks so much. Thanks to our witnesses for joining us today. I've been a member of this committee for Homeland Security Committee, Government Affairs, for 20 years. And one of my favorite memories of serving on this committee came at the end of the tragedy, and that was the attack on 9/11. And a bipartisan commission was created. The co-chairs were Lee Hamilton, one of my mentors in the House of Representatives, Congressman from Indiana, as I recall, chaired the Foreign Relations Committee, and a fellow who's a governor from our neighboring state of New Jersey, Tom King. And The Republican, and the two of them provided great leadership. The panel included the former Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman, and just a bunch of other people. And they worked together on the heels of 9/11 and produced, I think, something like 41, unanimously, 41 recommendations to Congress and the President at the time, George W. Bush, 41. And we enacted, I think, about 36 of them, which is pretty amazing when you think about how hard it is to get stuff done that day. But I have a question. I think we need to create a 9/11 style commission to look at the failures that led to the devastating attack on our capital on January 6th. It was like we needed one 19 years ago. A question, if I can, for Sunborn. Do you agree with the need for a commission, so the 9/11 like commission, nonpartisan, led by just terrific citizens? Do you agree that there was a need for a commission to analyze what went wrong?
What is he saying?
So you broke up a little bit, but I think you're asking me if I agree that something
I
similar to...
think I can barely hear you.
I think you asked me, you're breaking up a little bit and hard to hear, that do I agree that something similar to a 9/11 commission is worth having in this instance? And I think
That was my question, yes.
I think I would just say it this way. I've been involved in numerous after actions, lessons learned, and I can't think of a time where we haven't learned and improved. So I think anytime we can reflect back and learn, it's value added.
Yeah, a follow-up question to that, if I could, how can we ensure that a new 9/11 style commission examines the root causes, not just the symptoms of problems, what the root cause of it, and but how can we ensure
Great fucking question.
that word is established a 9/11 style commission would examine the root causes? That includes the threats posed by domestic terrorism.
If I understand your question, you're asking me, how do we ensure we have a 9/11 commission that's set up to do a good job?
Yeah,
And I don't
so
know
we're
that
not just looking at the symptoms of the problem, but like the root causes of the problem.
the root cause. I don't have any specific examples of how best to set that up. I've never been necessarily involved in picking sort of the road ahead and picking and selecting the team that does the review, but I have always benefited from the review.
Well, maybe part of it is for us as members of the Congress is to make clear, if there were to be a commission, our interest in certainly including focus on the root causes, the threat posed by domestic terrorists, and make sure that the leaders of that bipartisan commission are committed to examine the root causes. A second question, if I can, for Ms. Sandler. This is a question relating to intelligence failure. A large part of our conversation from last week's hearing focused on law and intelligence from the FBI. We shared, I believe, by email just the evening before on January 5th with a lower level person and at the Metropolitan Police Department. And it was not shared with any senior official, even though we've seen that actual intelligence that something awful was going to happen the next day. It could lead to murder and mayhem. But
Senator Carper, it's a little hard to hear you. I know our witnesses are. Yeah. You might want to just speak a little louder and slower or something. Yeah, it's your. Right. It's not you. It's your. Yes, go ahead.
Usually it's me, but this time I think it's I guess my question is, what happened? Somebody knew something awful could happen. Somebody knew, and they sent an email the evening before the event. I mean, why would somebody pick up the phone and call us a senior official and say, we just had this information, and we're like 12 hours away, we need to do something. And somebody considered doing that, sent an email. Could you just shed some light on how exactly we missed some of the grave warning sites until like the very last minute? How this happened?
Yeah, thank you for the question, sir. I think I'll start with the piece of information we received, again, was a non-attributable posting to a message board. And so very raw, very unvetted. We actually didn't receive that information until very late in the afternoon on the 5th and almost into the evening. And because of our emphasis on we need any intelligence, even though it was raw, unattributed, and unvetted, the Norfolk office quickly wrote that up specifically in a document following our processes to disseminate that. So a situation information report is for the intentional purpose of sharing that with state and local partners. Not only did they write that up because they knew how important it was to get that information out into hands of folks that might need it, our state and local partners. Within 40 minutes, they sent an email to the Washington field office with that information, and Washington field office also then followed up with an email to all task force officers. And so several different mechanisms were happened here, and we like to use the phrase belt and suspenders. We didn't want to make sure that one method of communication failed, so we wrote it up in the document for dissemination. We sent it in an email to all task force officers in the National Capital Region, and that does include Washington Metro as well as Capitol. But again, not wanting to rely on those two mechanisms only, it was then briefed verbally in a command post, an interagency command post, that we were doing briefings every couple of hours so that every agency in that command post had what we call a common operating picture, knowing what all of us knew at any given time. It was briefed at 8 p.m. on the evening of the 5th. And then taking it one step further, because we didn't want to limit our aperture to just the National Capital Region, because there's collection opportunity out there for all state and local partners and federal partners to help us, we loaded that suspicious information report into what we call the LEAP portal, and that is accessible by all state and local partners. So we really tried in various ways to make sure that we did not rely on one communication mechanism and really tried to rely on several so that the information would get to the right people.
Yeah, I'll close with this. I don't know that anybody picked up the phone and called somebody in charge and said, we've got a problem. And we're 12 hours away from seeing that problem up front and in person. We need to do something. And all well and good about sending out emails and helping people and that sort of thing, but somebody should just pick up the phone and say, we need to do something. This is urgent. I'm not sure to get it.
Thank you very much, Senator Carper. Next, Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel. General, thank you for your service. In response to Senator King a moment ago, he noted your testimony from earlier today that you had seen the requisite...
My boy, John Ossoff. My boy.
...authorities granted for the D.C. Guard in a matter of minutes in the past. In this case, it took over 3 hours. And
You stated you believed it was a combination of political concerns and optical concerns that led to that delay. Can you please break down which concerns you believe were political, which you believe were optical, and what's the basis for your assessment that the 3-hour delay was a function of political and optical concerns?
Well, I don't think it was so much political. It was, let me focus on the optics, because that's what I heard. The word optics and the word that having uniform presence at the Capitol could inflame the protesters. That's what I can.
And who made that statement?
So that was senior leaders in the United States Army, General Pyatt, General Flynn, and others. They got back to me saying, and that was on the phone call with District of Columbia senior leaders, that it wouldn't be their best military advice to send uniformed guardsmen to the Capitol because they didn't like the optics. And they had also said that they thought it could inflame. What they wanted to do was send guardsmen to relieve police officers in the city so more policemen could get to the Capitol.
That was the call at 2:30 p.m. following the chief's call to you. Is that correct, General?
Yes, sir.
And you conveyed to those on that call, who included the mayor of the District of Columbia, the Secretary of the Army, the acting Secretary of Defense, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the fact that the U.S. Capitol Police Chief's tone had been, as you described in your testimony, frantic, that he had informed you at 1:49 p.m. that the security perimeter of the Capitol had been breached by hostile rioters, that the joint session of Congress had been interrupted, that the Vice President was still on the premises?
No, I never said all that. What I relayed, and it wasn't to the chairman, what I relayed to the Army leadership was the call that Chief Son had with me at 13:49, at 1:49. And it was an urgent plea, and his voice was cracking, and he was serious. He needed help right then and there, every available guardsman. At the 2:32 call, that's when the deputy mayor was on the call, the Director of Homeland Security, Acting Chief Conti, Chief Son, and others, to include the Chief of the United States Secret Service Uniform Division, was on that call as well. So we dialed in, trying to get the Secretary of the Army on the call, but he wasn't available. So Army, the G3 for the Army, General Flynn, joined the call, and the Director of the Army Staff, General Pyatt, joined the call, and there were others on the call as well. And during that call, Chief Son pleaded to have National Guard support at the Capitol immediately. That was reinforced by Chief Conti. We need them there right now. The Capitol will be breached.
Thank you for the clarification, General. Appreciate that. Mr. Salasis, between 2:30 p.m. and 4:32 p.m., what were the internal deliberations of the Department of Defense to determine whether or not to grant the request?
Senator, there was discussion. Secretary McCarthy, who was the Secretary of the Army at the time, asked what was the National Guard going to do on the Capitol. Specifically, he wanted
Could you get a little closer to the microphone, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Secretary McCarthy wanted to understand exactly how the National Guard was going to be employed coming to the Capitol. Obviously, the environment, because they had heard that gunshots had been fired, was explosives. Obviously, pretty dynamic environment. So what he was trying to understand was what was the National Guard going to do when they came up here? Were they going to be asked to go into the building and clear the building? Were they going to be part of the outside perimeter? He was trying to understand that. He went as far as going to the Metro Police Department at 4:10 to sit down with them and make a clear understanding of how they were going to be employed. After that meeting at 4:10, he went back to the acting Secretary of Defense, and at 4:32, he approved the deployment of the National Guard.
Thank you. And he was aware, was he not, while he was conducting this analysis, that the nature of the chief's request, as relayed through the general, had been frantic, that the perimeter of the Capitol had already been breached, that members of Congress' lives were at risk, that the Vice President's life was at risk?
I would assume he knew that, Senator.
He was aware of that during that time. Thank you so much. I do have to reflect for a moment that ultimately responsibility for securing this complex falls to the United States Congress, which is responsible for these premises. I was dispirited speaking with the former chief in our last hearing when he described that there was no individual responsible for the security of the United States Capitol, that an urgent request for support from the Guard required concurrence with the 2 sergeants at arms, an unwieldy command structure, and then there was an unwieldy command structure imposed within the executive branch as well. General, based upon your military experience, is there any reason why the United States Capitol Police could not generate the capabilities to independently provide the kind of quick reaction force that the troops under your command would have, so that this institution, the United States Congress, is not dependent upon swift decision-making by the Secretary of the Army or concurrence between civilian and military leadership when the lives of members of Congress and the Vice President are at risk?
Well, yes, sir, Senator. The United States Capitol Police could develop that capability. I mean, they certainly could.
Thank you, General. And a final question for you. Had you conducted any exercises that included simulations of civilian military joint decision-making, simulations of command decisions involving contingencies that threatened the functioning of the U.S. Congress, the lives of members of Congress, joint sessions of Congress, outside of the context of specific preparations for specific national special security events?
No, sir. Might
exercises such as those have improved the capacity of the overall command to respond to an event like this?
Well, we were prepared to come to the Capitol and help the United States Capitol Police secure the Capitol. Here's what we do. We practice and rehearse civil disturbance. I think we're well exercised in that capability. It is a mandate that all National Guard practices civil disturbance. We're equipped for it, we train for it, and we're prepared to do it when called upon. So if we were to we'd have been approved to do it. We would have got there and helped the United States Capitol Police.
Understood, General, and I have no doubt that the forces under your command were appropriately trained and qualified. My question is whether and equipped. My question is whether any exercises have been undertaken that simulated the command decisions that would need to be made, the requests that you would need to make, for example, at the secretary level, in order to allow your troops, which were properly trained and equipped and had those capabilities.
Well, Senator, they're already there. That's a process that's well rehearsed, well practiced. We do it most of all with the Metropolitan Police Department. They're our primary customer. But if you recall, when the monuments were attacked in the summer, the Department of Interior, on behalf of the United States Park Police, exercised that same request. The Secretary of Defense authorized the District of Columbia National Guard to respond to monuments in the city and help the Park Police protect those monuments.
Thank
It's
you,
the
General.
same process.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good job.
Thank you, Senator Paul. You're recognized for your questions.
Oh no.
I think there's a danger in analyzing this as
Oh my God.
spending too much time on January 6th and not enough time on the days and weeks and months leading up to this. I think on that day, it would probably be superhuman to have gotten the National Guard there in 20 minutes or 30 minutes you might have. But really, I think the Capitol would have been breached and we would have been coming in after the fact, no matter how good you were. I think really there's a judgment question about whether or not we should have had more people there. In retrospect, we all agree there should have been more people there. But really, this is the judgment that should call into question predating that. Should we have had more Capitol Hill police there? My understanding is over 1,000 Capitol Hill police that were either off duty or not here, that could have, and probably in retrospect, better judgment would have had them in there, and we would have had riot lines, and we might have prevented this from happening. So I think we can talk all we want about January 6th, but really it's the decision-making leading up to that. Someone made a bad judgment call, and we need to be better prepared. If we want to fix this in the future, it isn't about calling the National Guard out quicker. It's about having 1,000 people standing there before the riot happens so the riot doesn't happen. So that's where the real mistake is, and I think we can get too bogged down on the details of January 6th and forget about what could have actually fixed this. Ms. Sanborn, in the investigation afterwards, did the FBI or any intelligence gathering entity of government subpoena, request, or issue a warrant for non-individualized phone and credit card records for anyone on Capitol Hill on January 6th?
I don't have the specific answer to a specific subpoena, but I do know that we've issued lots of subpoenas and lots of search warrants as a result of each of those individuals.
Yeah, my question's not towards individuals. Like if you see John Smith on a video, I'm fine with looking at his records. My question is, did you have a generalized collection of data about people who were on the Hill on January 6th?
Not that I'm aware of. I do know that we have used data, this is reflected in some of the charging documents that had geolocation data. I don't know the background for what the underlying predicate was for that search warrant, but I do know that we obtained geolocation data. I just don't have the predicate.
Do you understand the potential problem here if you gather everybody's data and then start searching through it and looking for people who might have done something wrong, as opposed to the traditional law enforcement where we think John Smith is on a video breaking into the Capitol. Now we want to look at his records and see if he was there to help prove he was there. I think that's a reasonable request. But we have had articles written about the Bank of America sharing all of people's credit card information. What I need to know is, did you request it? Did you subpoena it? Did the Bank of America just decide they don't care about the privacy of their customers and just upload everybody's data? These are important questions. The Fourth Amendment's out there to protect against generalized searches. And I think you know the importance. Most people in law enforcement know the importance of you individualize. We're all fine with that. But there are even reports that elected members of Congress's phone calls, records, as well as credit card records are in some of this data. Have you heard of that or seen any of that?
I don't have any specifics on that, sir. I'd happy to follow up.
All right. So if we want to get the answer, we just need to direct it to the director of the FBI.
I mean, you can direct it. I'm happy to follow up and answer the question for you.
Right, but you have not personally seen any of that or seen any cross-referencing of records between a general category to try to find individuals as opposed to have an individual and then looking at data?
No, again, sir, I don't know what went into the background for the application for the search warrant, so I would like to follow up and get you that detail. And I do know that we did receive information from private partners. I'd also like to follow up on that specific detail about Bank of America for you as well.
But you don't know the answer?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I think it's very important. Everyone wants to get to the bottom of this, but it's also very important that we not have some huge dragnet that everybody that went shopping on January 6th in D.C. is now a suspect and going to be charged with some kind of conspiracy that could be 20 years in prison. So as we do the investigation, it's important that those who committed violence are treated accordingly and given significant penalties. But I think it's also important that those of us who have been for criminal justice reform for poor, underrepresented people in our cities, also want the same kind of justice here, that we're not charging people with crimes that are 20 years for doing something that was admittedly wrong and they should be punished for. But there's a difference between assaulting a policeman and causing bodily harm, which I think requires jail time, and being the president of the Capitol. And I worry that if we're going to look at everybody's phone shopping records and 20,000 people are here, I hope that's not what's going on, is that we're looking for anybody in D.C. and we're going to just develop a case out of nothing without having seen them actually commit some sort of crime.
Yes, sir, totally understand. I would like to follow up on both of those. Again, I'm not clear on what went into the application for the phone data. I do know we have phone data. I am aware of the Bank of America situation and would like to follow up in detail with you on that.
And my suspicion is it was gotten in a generalized way because we have very little concern for individual privacy anymore, and the warrant requirements and some of the court precedents allow the FBI to gather this, which is something I object to, but gathering things in a large way, not specific to an individual, not specific to probable cause, and not specific to someone alleged to have found a crime, but more a dragnet of, hey, let's just look at all the phone data on Capitol Hill. And I want you to know that there are at least some of us in this country who don't like that.
Senator Hawley, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. General Walker, let me start with you, if I could. You've testified to several senators today that you faced restrictions for the deployment of the quick reaction force that you had assembled, and those are restrictions that you had not had to deal with before. Is that broadly correct?
That is correct.
What is your understanding for why those restrictions were put in place?
Why is this nigga Josh Hawley asking questions? My nigga, you should be on the defense, bro. You should be. Oh my God.
Well, Senator, it was never really explained to me. So I'm a major general. I don't question the people above me. The Secretary of the Army is the Secretary of the Army.
And Madam Chair, thank you, witnesses, for being here. General Walker, let me start with you, if I could. You've testified to several senators today that you faced restrictions for the deployment of the quick reaction force that you had assembled, and those are restrictions that you had not had to deal with before. Is that broadly correct?
That is correct.
What is your understanding for why those restrictions were put in place?
Well, Senator, it was never really explained to me. So I'm a major general. I don't question the people above me. The Secretary of the Army is the Secretary of the Army. Secretary of Defense is the Secretary of Defense. So all I know is that it was I had restrictions that they were unusual to me. I hadn't had them in the past.
Mr. Solisas, let me ask you about your response to this. You said something earlier to Senator Portman that caught my attention. You said to him, when he was asking about the same issue, you said that, and I'm quoting you now, several things happened in the spring, end quote, that may have led to these changes. What are you referring to there?
Senator, what I'm referring to is there was a number of incidents in the spring where we had helicopters flying above U.S. citizens. We had spy planes, RC-26 flying over folks who were protesting. We also had law enforcement officers that were in military uniforms, which sometimes confused people. So when the new secretary came in, he wanted to make sure that he had guidance on making decisions. Now, I will point out, Senator, that the Secretary of Defense is the only authority to order military personnel into civil disturbance operations. That is the Secretary of Defense. This is more clarifying information because it talks about not just civil disturbance. It talks about using helicopters, using planes, using types of equipment. That's why the memo was published, was for that reason, because of the events in the spring. The Secretary of Defense wanted to have that authority vested in him. It was a very clear chain of command. It went from the Secretary of Defense to the Secretary of the Army to General Walker.
Thank you for that answer. So if I understand you correctly, the events of the spring, which we're all familiar with, I mean, we had the attack on the White House where 60 Secret Service officers were injured. The president had to be evacuated into a bunker. A church across the street from the White House was lit on fire. We had the incidents in Portland, Oregon, where 277 federal officers were injured at the federal courthouse there. We had rioting in various other cities across the country, including in Washington. This, of course, was politically controversial, the use of the National Guard in some of those incidents, the use of the National Guard here in Washington, D.C. The Washington Post even reported on this. For instance, June the 4th, 2020, Humvees, helicopters, and the National Guard, D.C. officials pushed back on show of federal force on city streets. And then from January 4th, National Guard, this is still a Post, National Guard activated for D.C. protests with more restraints than in June. So it's the picture here, Mr. Solisas, if I got this right, that we had these, we had riots, we had civil unrest in the summer. The National Guard was involved in some of these to some extent. That was politically controversial, as journalists at the time documented. I'm sure people watching this are very familiar with. That then led, in some way, to this reaction where, well, we're going to be careful. We're going to be more careful. We're going to put some restraints on how we deploy the Guard that we previously haven't before. Have I got that correct?
You do, Senator.
Bro, if there was another, like, Black Lives Matter type protest, I guarantee you none of this bullshit would apply. It would be the same shit. Same fucking shit.
Exactly what happened, Senator.
Okay.
Just to call into mind, we had a new secretary, too. Secretary Esper had left. Secretary Miller came in. He was aware of the events, and he wanted to make the decisions at his level.
Right. Got it. I think that's helpful. I think that's very helpful clarity.
Where's Secretary Esper? Where are all these other top niggas? Like, y'all asking these underling niggas questions. Where are the niggas who know the answers?
Testimony. I think that's something that this committee and committees and Congress is going to have to grapple with as we go forward. That there was a political reaction to events from over the summer, and that political reaction resulted in restraints being put on Guard deployment that ultimately ended up being dangerous.
I mean, who was the president at the time? Donald Trump.
Here on January the 6th. Ms. Sandberg, can I come to you for a second and just follow up on something that Senator
and his appointees? So I mean,
Paul was asking about. I had the chance to talk with Director Wray yesterday in the Judiciary Committee in a wide-ranging hearing there, and one of the things I asked him about were these reports about private companies who have conducted broad searches of their customer databases and then turned over, according to reports, turned over this information voluntarily. He said he didn't know one way or the other. I heard you give a similar response to Senator Paul. You said you'd follow up with him. Can I ask you to do the same with me with specifics about that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And let me just ask you a little more broadly. To your knowledge, has the FBI requested or required private companies to turn over metadata in order to identify individuals who may have been present in the Capitol region or engaged in violence on the 6th?
Anything we would have requested from any of those companies would have been via subpoena or search warrant, so via lawful process.
But
I would have to get you the background of when we may have asked for that or not. I'm not positive of the situation, but I just would reiterate that if we obtain that, it would be from a lawful court order or a subpoena.
Yeah, Director Wray gave me a similar answer yesterday, but he similarly said he did not know of the specifics. That was his language, so he didn't actually know if there had been any such requests or not. I think he also went on to say he would be surprised, but he just didn't know. So you're telling me you don't have any additional knowledge of the specifics?
I'm definitely not aware of a situation where we requested it. Whether or not somebody offered it, both of those are things I would like to follow up. Any request would have come with legal process. Whether it was offered to us voluntarily, that's where I would like to follow up. I know you specifically mentioned Bank of America to him yesterday. I am aware of that situation and would like to follow up with you on it.
Okay, great. But you're not aware of any request made by the Bureau?
Not outside legal process.
Okay, got it. Are you aware of any of these methods that have been reported using metadata, cell phone location data, financial data? Were any of these used by the FBI during Operation Legend or any other investigations over the summer related to civil violence then?
I'm not aware, sir. That would be my counterpart, but happy to follow up and have him follow up with you.
That would be great. I'd appreciate that. Thank you all for being here and for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz from the Rules Committee.
Oh my God.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh my God.
Thank you to each of the witnesses for being here. Thank you for your service helping keep this country safe. As we look back on the terror attack that played out in the Capitol on January 6th, it is apparent that far more should have been done to keep the Capitol safe. And
yeah, I can't listen to this nigga talk. I'm sorry. I just can't listen to this nigga talk.
Week said that he had requested the support of the D.C. National Guard on January 6th, but that the Army Secretary denied his request, saying, quote, "I don't like the visual of the National Guard standing aligned with the Capitol in the background." Is that accurate?
Senator, I'm not aware of the Secretary of the Army talking to Chief Son about the D.C. National Guard in the Capitol. It's been reported.
I just want to hit it for the niggas. They asked about the niggas on top of them.
Prior to January.
Subpoena those
and in particular, whether you had the authority to employ a quick reaction force prior to the January 6th, and would that have potentially made a difference on January 6th if you had been able to do so?
So, Senator Cruz, I would have had that authority prior to January 6th to employ, direct a quick reaction force. So the Secretary of Defense, his letter authorizes me to use the quick reaction force, and it says only as a last resort, where the Secretary of the Army, his direction to me withholds the authority to use the quick reaction force, and he will only authorize that and only after he has a concept of operations sent to him, a CONOP sent to him. So that was restriction that was unusual to me. I had never seen that before.
And Madam Chair, I would ask unanimous consent that both the tweet and the letter from D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser.
The tweet. Bruh. Don't tell me this shit's not working.
Be entered into the record.
Without objection, it will be entered in the record.
Well, I think that we are starting to wrap up this hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses again for your testimony. But I have a couple of quick questions, and I know Chairwoman Klobuchar has a couple, and then we'll have some closing comments. I guess I'll start with these two questions in the preface. I'm going to start these questions where I started my questions initially, with the events that happened in the summer of 2020, where authorization happened very quickly for the National Guard. There was no delay. You were immediately deployed, General Walker, and yet it happened differently prior to or on January 6th. And part of that is some of the surveillance. So my first question for you, Ms. Sanborn, it's been reported that the FBI deployed its state-of-the-art surveillance plane to watch the protests that occurred in Washington, D.C. over the summer in response to the death of George Floyd. How do you explain the difference in how the FBI responded to the Black Lives Matter protest compared to the pro-Trump protest?
So I don't have any specifics on the plane. It's just not my purview of something that I cover specifically as the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism. But what I can tell you from the Counterterrorism Division's approach to both of those was not different. We go after the violence, and what we saw all summer long was violence and people using the guise of First Amendment protected activity to conduct violence. And we opened hundreds of cases and arrested close to 100 people throughout the summer and their activities. So our approach to both instances was equal opportunity. If you're going to do violence in the United States and break federal law, the FBI is going to investigate.
Well, certainly, and I understand that, and you should. There's no quarrel there. But where would we get the answer on the use of a surveillance plane versus not on January 6th, but on other occasions across the country?
Yeah, I'll take the question back. I think it would be best posed for our critical incident response group, but definitely I'll find somebody that can follow up with you.
I appreciate that. General Walker, you were also asked by someone on the panel about the helicopter and in relation to January 6th, and you said that's not normally something we would use, and I believe, I don't want to mischaracterize, you said it wouldn't be necessary, but that's what I did get from it is that it's not normally used. And yet it was used in the summer protest. Why was it used there and not on January 6th? Was there a difference of circumstances? How do we explain that difference?
So it is my understanding, so one of my deputy commanding generals put the helicopter up. Ultimately, it's still me, but the request was made to get, I believe the request was to be able to observe and report the crowd size. It was at night, that night, versus a daytime operation. And so that's why the helicopter was there. I just want to correct the record regarding the RC-26 that was mentioned. The District of Columbia National Guard never requested an RC-26 fly over the District of Columbia. So the difference between the summer and January 6th was the Secretary of the Army was right next to me for days at a time. When it came time to respond to the White House, the Secretary of the Army was with me. The monuments, the Secretary of the Army was with me. He either came to my headquarters, he rode in the car with me, or I rode in the car with him. I was present when he called the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General to request approval for a request that the city made. So the city wanted us to conduct additional traffic control points, blocking vehicles. The Secretary gave me a verbal and then contacted the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General, and it was done. So those are just some of the differences that occurred. And I didn't have the Secretary of the Army with me on January 6th.
Well, the Secretary was with you during the summer. Those were large gatherings. All the evidence pointed that this was going to be a very large gathering, and we know that based on social media, that the Capitol and members of Congress was going to be a target. Is there a reason that you know of that the Secretary of Army was unable to be with you on that day?
I don't, but the Secretary of the Army is the Secretary of the entire Army, so I don't know what else was going on throughout the Army. We're globally deployed. I do not know why he was not with me on January 6th as he was during the summer.
Very good. Ms. Sanborn, finally, I'll wrap up here. Ms. Sanborn, could you please commit that in the future, the FBI will provide any threat reporting, even if it's not yet corroborated or fully analyzed, relating to the security of the Capitol, to the U.S. Capitol Police, both Sergeant of Arms and congressional and committee leadership?
I believe I can do that, sir, yes.
Great. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you all. And I know it's been a long day and you probably want some lunch. I really appreciate your patience today. I wanted to end with some ideas and constructive ideas, which is why we're doing this hearing, and how we can best do that. And any of you can take this, but this is just based on all of the experience you've had. We have a unique situation here at the Capitol where the chief is reporting to this police review board. General Walker may be most familiar with it, but they're reporting to the sergeant at arms, the two sergeants of arms, and the architect of the Capitol. It's three of them. And in fact, just today, Senator Schumer announced a new sergeant at arms, Karen Gibson, while you guys were sitting there. And so there is something about the structure which may work for requesting resources or making decisions, but certainly didn't work in this context where the chief, the then Chief Sund, was leading up to it, asking them, probably not able to do exactly what he may have wanted to do at the time. And then the most ridiculous of situations during the insurrection is actually calling them for their advice and authority while they are individually guarding the members and safely getting them to other places in this crisis situation. And just your views on whether or not that is an ideal situation. This is called a softball, General Walker. That is whether or not this is a ideal situation, and maybe Ms. Sanborn for trying to make decisions in a crisis as we look at changes that we can suggest and make here at the Capitol.
So the Sergeant of Arms, both of them, were briefed by me personally in 2018 on what it takes to request District of Columbia National Guard support.
Mm-hmm.
I sat down with both Sergeant of Arms, myself and Brigadier General Dean and others in their office and explained the six-step process and left them with a PowerPoint presentation. I also briefed Chief Sun and his predecessor. I had them come to the Armory and explain in detail what it takes if you ever need District of Columbia National Guard support. What I think might be helpful in the future is that is practice, that when you come up with an event, will we need District of Columbia National Guard support? You pick a day and say, and then we exercise it.
Mm-hmm.
And then have the District of Columbia National Guard actually come out in an exercise. Here's where we would go. Here's how we would support the United States Capitol Police.
Mm-hmm.
But both sergeants of arms understood what it takes to request District of Columbia National Guard support.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Salas, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I do. I work on a regular basis with the Capitol Police Board. I just met with the new team on Monday, in fact. The challenge, quite candidly, is in contingency operations and contingency events, there really needs to be one person in charge making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
To have four people that have to either agree or come together and have the same, I just don't think it's a very workable solution. I also deal with all the Capitol Police requests that come to the Defense Department. Normally, we get the request actually at the last minute most of the time, because it takes all four of them to sign the document to give us the request. For example, right now we have the National Guard on the Capitol today. It's supposed to end on the 12th. We're trying to figure out with the Capitol Police Board what's going to happen after the 12th. We need an answer in the Defense Department so that we understand.
Exactly.
So the Secretary can review and make a decision on how that support will either be continued or adjusted.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I would agree with that.
I just would like to add something else, Senator,
Sure.
if I could. I do think that all of us now, because of the unique environment that we're in, as we talked about extremism, I know we talked a lot about intelligence assessments and those types of things, and they're critical to this effort, really being able to predict. But I think we also need to anticipate, and when we see large crowds gathering in the National Capital Region. They're all permitted by the Park Police, so we know when they're going to be here. We need to do a better job anticipating that kind of activity so that we think about the most likely and most dangerous scenarios that we face. With that, we need to plan together, we need to train together, we need to exercise together, and we need to have an integrated security plan here for the NCR. As I mentioned in my opening statement about the number of law enforcement organizations that we have here in the NCR and the different jurisdictional responsibilities, we need to bring them together so we know how that we're going to operate in these complex environments that we're facing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to understand the critical capabilities that each of us can bring to that. And we need to make sure that we have prearranged agreements to provide those capabilities in a timely fashion.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is when you start from zero and you're faced with the challenges that we were faced on the 6th collectively, that's a very difficult position to start from. So
Exactly.
I think if we work at some of those things, I think we can be much more effective. And the Department of Defense really looks forward to working with people on that.
Yes, and I had a very good meeting with the head of the Joint Chiefs. He actually gave one of the highest civilian honors to one of our heroes here. And I was able to talk with him about this. And I think that this is a moment. I thought that that Ms. Sandberg said it best when she said she's always learned and improved. And it's hard to do that in an environment like this, and I know it's not easy. We ask these questions, especially when people think, well, yeah, okay, maybe we messed up this part of it, but how about those guys? But we know there's things that can be done better, and so I really appreciate that. I don't know if the two of you want to add anything to my question, and that'll be it for me.
Nothing to add, ma'am.
Okay.
No,
Ms.
nothing.
Moza? Okay, very good.
All right. Let's see what the press secretary had to say about things. Actually, let's do the COVID briefing first, actually. Whoa. Let's go with that audio, my guy.
Heated by
Yeah, we're not doing
that they were behind on manufacturing. Fix this, to accelerate the process and to think big.
Yeah, we're not
all
doing
50
that.
states to get teachers, school staff, and childcare workers their first shot by the end of this month. To help states do that, starting next week, we will be using the federal pharmacy program to prioritize vaccinating teachers, school staff, and childcare workers during the month of March. This is a part of the president's effort to urge states to prioritize vaccines.
I don't understand why they started in the middle of the fucking.
Of March. This is teachers, school. He laid out more details. Everyone. Okay, I have a couple of items for all of you at the top. Yesterday, I discussed the president's announcement about the historic partnership between Merck and Johnson & Johnson to produce more COVID-19 vaccines, and of course, he laid out more details yesterday afternoon. He also directed states to prioritize teachers for vaccinations in an effort to treat in-person learning like the essential service it is. He challenged all 50 states to get teachers, school staff, and childcare workers their first shot by the end of this month. To help states do that, starting next week, we will be using the federal pharmacy program to prioritize vaccinating teachers, school staff, and childcare workers during the month of March. This is a part of the president's effort to urge states to prioritize vaccines for all essential workers. The special enrollment period, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I have an update on that and the number of people who have enrolled. On February 15th, the Biden-Harris administration opened healthcare.gov for 3 months to provide all Americans the opportunity to sign up for health insurance through a special enrollment period. In the 2 weeks since, more than 200,000 Americans have gotten covered. These numbers are encouraging, but we can't slow down until every American has health coverage. There's plenty of time left to sign up, and of course, people who need health insurance can go to healthcare.gov to sign up before May 15th. Today also, and there's been a little bit of reporting about this, so I just wanted to go through this to provide some clarity. The president will issue his interim national security strategic guidance, laying out a vision for how the United States can seize what we view as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to renew America's advantages at home and abroad. The guidance is designed to communicate the administration's strategic approach and central priorities for national security policy. It describes the changed strategic landscape the United States faces today and affirms our enduring core national interests, including protecting the security of the American people, expanding economic prosperity and opportunity, and realizing and defending the democratic values at the heart of the American way of life. The guidance will provide direction to departments and agencies in advance of a new national security strategy, which we expect to release later this year, as many past presidents have done. And we will post this ISG on the White House website later this afternoon. I would also encourage everyone to tune into the remarks of Secretary Blinken, delivered this morning, A Foreign Policy for the American People, which touched on a number of the same pillars. This afternoon, the President and Vice President will also meet with members of Congress, which we announced last night, to begin working together in a bipartisan way to end cancer as we know it. Defeating cancer is of significant personal importance to the President, the First Lady, and the Vice President, and cancer is, of course, a disease that affects many Americans, no matter their political affiliation. This has been a priority of the President's, as we all know, for many, many years, and this is his first engagement with members of Congress in the Oval Office about it. One last piece, just to make sure you all are following the activities of the Vice President. The Vice President will be visiting a woman-owned small business in Alexandria, Virginia later today called Fiberspace. The Vice President heard how the small business has been impacted by COVID-19 and how they had to adjust their business model. She also will discuss the importance of passing the American Rescue Plan, of course, as you've heard us all talk about a few times while she's visiting this small business. With that, Alex, go ahead.
I want to start with your OMB nominee. Yesterday, the last outstanding Republican Senator, Lisa Murkowski, said that she did not tell the White House her stance on Tandon. What eventually did Tandon's nomination and why was she withdrawn? And can you talk a little bit about who you're looking at for a replacement, particularly Shalanda Young, Pelosi, Hoyer, and Representative Clyburn came out in support of her today. Is the White House looking at her as a potential replacement?
Well, let me first say that given Neera Tanden withdrew her nomination just last night, I would not expect, or you should not expect, any announcement on a future nominee this week. Obviously, the President's schedule is quite full. His focus remains on the American Rescue Plan and the range of meetings and engagements he has already planned and scheduled. Of course, he has nominated Shalanda Young to serve as Deputy OMB Director, and that nomination, along with about a half a dozen nominees who have been nominated to serve as heading agencies, are still sitting and waiting to be confirmed. And so we would certainly encourage and urge action and urgent action on moving those forward. In terms of the nomination, Neera Tanden, as we've talked about for some time in here, is someone who's been has been leading still leads, I should say, a think tank in Washington, D.C. She certainly saw that the path to her own confirmation was narrowed and did not look like there was a path forward. I'm not going to get into the details of who was or wasn't against her or for her or was or wasn't going to vote for her or against her. We can leave that to members of the Senate to speak to on their own. But it was a recognition that Neera Tanden made. We certainly, of course, as we noted in the statement last night, accepted her decision to withdraw her nomination. And when we have an announcement about the new nominee, we will make that. But again, as we noted in the statement, the President's looking forward to finding a place for her in the administration and values her experience and her talents and is looking forward to utilizing her.
And then the threats against the Capitol tomorrow, is the President monitoring those? Has he been briefed? And has the administration directed law enforcement to prepare any better than they were prepared considering the January 6th activities at the Capitol?
Well, we certainly have been watching the hearings that have been happening on Capitol Hill over the last 2 days. Our team has been. I know the President has caught clips of those, but of course he has a full schedule, as you all well know. And we are ready and eager to work in partnership with leaders in Congress on any recommendations that are made to ensure their safety and security and to prevent the events that happened on January 6th from ever happening again.
If I can quickly, a little homework around here as it relates to the COVID relief bill. I know we'll see you the President speaking to the House Democratic Caucus later today. Can you confirm that the President has signed off on these reduced income thresholds as it relates to those direct payments?
Well, let me provide a little context here because some of the reporting, it's all coming out, so some of the reporting is aligned with accuracy and some is not. No one's fault. First, I talked to the President about this morning. He's pleased with the progress that is being made on the rescue plan. As someone who served for 36 years in the Senate, he is certainly familiar with the journey that it takes from a proposal to a bill being signed. And in every instance, in the final stage, which we feel we are in now, there are suggestions, there are changes, there are negotiations between even different members, different parts of one party. That's what's happening now. And he is open to, has always said, he's open to good ideas and to proposals that will strengthen the package. What he has been firm on is that the package needs to be large enough to meet the scope of the twin crises we're facing, COVID and the economic downturn. He's been firm on the importance of the $1,400 checks going out to Americans, and he has fought for that tooth and nail, and that is a bar for him. And he has also been firm on the thresholds at which Americans should receive those checks. So as we've seen in the reporting, it's $75K and $150K. He has been clear that those are important thresholds to him. What we're talking about here, and I realize you didn't actually ask this, but just for clarity for everyone, is where is the ramp up and how far the ramp up goes.
Where it ends.
Where it ends, I should say, where it ends. And he has also been open from the beginning for that being more targeted and for there to be a steeper cliff at which that ramp down ends.
So for clarity, does he support, I know he's okay with what you just said out there, is he okay with it ending at $80,000 for individuals, $160,000 for couples, and $120,000 for heads of households?
He is comfortable with where the negotiations stand. Of course, there are going to be ongoing discussions. We don't have a final bill, as you know. There will be ongoing discussions. He is comfortable and knows there will be tweaks at the margin. What his firm viewpoint is that it needs to meet the scope of the challenge. It needs to be the size he's proposed. It needs to have the core components in order to have the impact on the American people.
He's confident that he'll have 50 Democrats that all support where it stands based on those changes to which you just referred to. Yeah.
He is certainly, that's one of the reasons why he's meeting with members of Congress. You can define them any way you like, moderates, progressives, Republicans, because he's not taking anything for granted as we work to get this past the finish line.
Let me ask you about these new rocket attacks that took place in Iraq. Obviously, still no formal assessment on who's responsible here. A lot of suspicion Iran's behind this. The president said to me last week, he said to them, you can't act with impunity. Be careful here. What do you do about this? What is the response we should expect from this administration following this new round of attacks?
Well, just to confirm some of the pieces you mentioned. We are still assessing the impact of this latest rocket attack, including determining precise attribution. Of course, they just happened over the course of last night. As you noted also, we responded to recent Iranian-backed attacks on coalition and U.S. forces in a manner that was calculated, proportionate, and fully covered by legal authorities. That will be our model moving forward. If we assess a further response is warranted, we will take action again in a manner and time of our choosing, and we reserve that option. The president was briefed by his national security team this morning, was of course monitoring the details overnight. What we won't do is make a hasty or ill-informed decision that further escalates the decision or plays into the hands of our adversaries.
Let me ask one last question. Given the news that came out last night about Texas and Mississippi, the president was in Texas, met with Governor Abbott just a matter of days ago. They have now, in both of those states, removed their mask mandates, and they're reopening at 100%, even as this White House says now is not the time for that. How do you characterize those decisions, and what do you say to the governors of those two states that are making them?
Well, first, the president's position on mask wearing is based on the recommendations of health and medical experts and their views that it could save 50,000 lives. That is why he asked the American people to wear masks for 100 days. For nearly a year, we've been dealing and navigating and coping with this pandemic across the country. And this entire country has paid the price for political leaders who ignored the science when it comes to the pandemic. We talked a little bit yesterday about how people are starting to feel a little bit better in some cases. You go to the grocery store and there's Clorox wipes available. And a year into this, that feels better. But there's still more work that needs to be done. We need to remain vigilant. And he believes that, and he's hopeful, that people in these states will continue to follow the guidelines that have been set out and the recommendations made by health and medical experts.
Go ahead. Jen, thank you. I have several questions about teachers getting vaccinated, but to follow up on Peter first, does President Biden plan to speak to the governors to have them reconsider their orders? And secondly, what are people in those states supposed to do if they're confused about whether to listen to their governor or the president?
Well, first, I would say we're not asking people just to listen to the president. Of course, we recommend that, but we're asking people to listen to health experts, medical experts, the CDC, to Dr. Fauci, to others who are basing their recommendations on how to save people's lives. That's what we're asking people to do. The president's view is well known. We all know it quite well about why mask wearing is important, again, based on health and medical experts. He speaks with governors of both parties on a regular basis. He obviously traveled with the governor last Friday, and I'm sure he will raise this at the next opportunity he has.
On the president's goal to vaccinate educators by the end of this month, last month he made it very clear that, as you well know, it's up to states to determine how to prioritize vaccines. And you reminded us that even though there are federal recommendations, the process is not to mandate states to prioritize anyone. What has changed between then and now, and what power does President Biden have to direct states to prioritize teachers?
Well, first, 30 states are already doing this. So that is the majority of states in the country who are treating teachers as essential workers. And that's what the president is asking, what he is recommending. We, of course, right now, the teachers will have access through pharmacies. That is, the supply that goes to pharmacies is through the federal supply. And so that is an area where we can work through a program that we have instituted to ensure that teachers are prioritized.
So today you've said that he is challenging states, he's asking states, he's urging states, but yesterday the president said he is directing states. So is it just a firm request, or is he using some mechanism and authority to direct them?
Well, again, he is using a federal program that is distributing vaccines to pharmacies across the country to ensure that teachers are prioritized. It remains the same case it's been, where it is not a prerequisite for schools to open. It is just one of the mitigation steps that can be taken for teachers to be vaccinated. But he believes that teachers should be treated as essential workers. There is, of course, the power of the bully pulpit. There is the power of the pharmacy program that the federal government is instituting. And certainly, as the President of the United States, the leader of the country, he is conveying this is important. It's not a Republican or a Democratic issue whether or not our kids are behind. We have all seen the impact on mental health. We've seen the impact on kids doing Zoom from their kitchen tables and kitchen counters. And everybody wants, if the president wants kids to be back in school, this is part of the effort to ease that.
One last question on the effort. You're using the federal pharmacy program, which was supposed to establish more equity, especially for communities of color. Dr. Celine Gounder has called the move to prioritize teachers anti-equity, since most teachers are white, and it's taking away from those people who are underserved. So what is the administration doing to make sure teachers and these people who are underserved will have the same access to vaccines?
Well, first, we simply disagree, and not just me or the president, but the head of our equity task force and our health and medical team, for a couple of reasons. One is it's critical to remember that the program is beyond teachers. It includes bus drivers, janitorial workers, childcare workers, a workforce that is broadly incredibly diverse. Second, getting kids back to school is one of the most equitable steps we can take, because what we've seen statistically is that Black and Latino students are disproportionately experiencing learning loss for a variety of reasons. Internet interconnectivity, parents who are disproportionately frontline workers, and this compounds the damaging effects of policies that already leave students of color with lower quality resources. So our view is actually that this step is one that is meant to help communities of color, help students who are already being disproportionately disadvantaged by schools being closed.
Thank you, Jen.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. Following up on this, you said again that the CDC's recommendations were clear that educators don't have to be vaccinated to safely reopen schools, but we're hearing this big push, this prioritization with the White House through the pharmacy program. So what do you say to critics who say this just isn't about science, it's about politics and appeasing the unions?
I would say that our actions have been clear, that we've been basing our recommendations to school, our work with school districts to reopen on science, on the recommendations of CDC guidelines, and that we've been clear. It's not a prerequisite. It is not a requirement for teachers to be vaccinated. However, the president has also been clear he believes they should be prioritized, as many other frontline workers are, because they are playing a vital role, as essential workers, teaching our kids, educating the future of the country. So, this is a challenging issue, but this is a step where the president could take, using his ability, his authority, a federal government program, to ensure he's sending the message that teachers should be prioritized because of the value of their work, the essential role they play teaching the next generation. Schools across the country, many of which keep reopening every single week. As you know, Dr. Biden and our new Secretary of Education are visiting a few today. We'll continue to work with them and push for them. It's not a prerequisite, and nothing has changed on that front.
I'd like to ask about Director Ray, but if I can just follow up there. Sure. What's your message then to other essential workers? Are teachers really more at risk in the classroom than Americans who are working in a meatpacking plant?
Well, look, certainly the president has taken a number of steps over the last couple of days to expedite the availability and the access of vaccines to Americans across the country working in a range of industries. This is a step that he felt was important to take because of the impact on the next generation of kids, of the future of the workforce, future leaders in our country. And it's very clear that it's important for schools to be reopened. It's not a political issue or a partisan issue. We all agree with that.
Okay, and thanks, I appreciate it. Just on we have all these back-to-back hearings on Capitol Hill about the January 6th riots, and so much of a blame game, all this finger pointing. Capitol Police saying they didn't get information from FBI, the FBI saying they gave what they knew. How can the president be confident now in Director Ray's ability to protect against another attack?
Well, he remains confident in FBI Director Wray. Of course, we will be monitoring the hearings, and I think there will be lessons learned as we come out of the hearings that will be applied across government, whether that's in Congress or certainly where they apply in federal agencies. And as you know, it's not limited to these hearings. We have an Attorney General, and there are investigations that are underway there, and we certainly want to do everything we can across the board to prevent an attack from happening in the future. Go ahead.
Yeah. So on the congressional nominations, today your nominee for Health Secretary, Xavier Becerra, basically got a tied vote in the Senate Finance Committee. Are you concerned, and have you assured yourself with people like Joe Manchin that this nomination is also not in jeopardy? Can you say a word about that? And what does it mean that you lost the Tandon nomination? What does that mean in terms of your ability to get things done, or was that just an isolated case?
All right, I'm done. Tomorrow's a new day. Peace.